Have you ever noticed how quickly composure seems to vanish when modern leaders face real crisis? One moment they appear confident and in control, the next, under pressure, they unravel before our eyes, making reactive decisions, surrendering to panic, or becoming paralyzed by public opinion. It's as if they're operating without any internal guidance system, no matter how polished their resumes or impressive their titles. But what if there was an ancient, almost secret playbook for maintaining unshakable calm and clarity, even as the world falls apart around you? A set of principles so timeless and deeply rooted in human psychology that they've guided some of history's most resilient figures through plagues, wars, and the collapse of empires. This is what the Stoics called the invisible rulebook of composure, not a physical text, but a mental and ethical framework designed to fortify the mind against chaos. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled Rome during one of its most turbulent periods, captured the essence of this mindset when he wrote in his private journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He didn't say this from a place of ease. He penned these words while managing military revolts, economic instability, and a devastating pandemic that wiped out millions. Yet instead of being crushed by circumstance, he turned inward, relying on a discipline of thought that allowed him to lead with purpose and peace despite the turmoil. This wasn't a unique superpower reserved for emperors and sages. It was a practical, learnable approach to life that transformed how individuals respond to adversity. In this video, we're going to explore that invisible rulebook. We'll uncover the core Stoic principles that have guided leaders through history's darkest hours, ideas that remain startlingly relevant today, whether you're navigating personal loss, professional uncertainty, or the overwhelming noise of modern life. This isn't about suppressing emotion or pretending everything is fine. It's about building a foundation of mental resilience that allows you to respond rather than react, to lead with intention instead of fear, and to find meaning even in moments of collapse. By the end, you'll not only understand these timeless ideas, you'll have practical insights to start applying them in your own life, reshaping how you face challenges from the inside out. When everything around you is falling apart, what can you actually control? This is the foundational question at the heart of the Stoic principle known as the Dichotomy of Control, and it's the first and perhaps most critical rule in this invisible guidebook for leaders. The ancient teacher Epictetus, who was born into slavery and faced immense adversity, framed it with stunning clarity. He said that the chief task in life is to simply distinguish between what is within our power and what is not. Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, our aversions, in short, whatever is our own doing, these are within our control. Everything else, our property, our reputation, our status, even the health and actions of others, these are not. He argued that suffering and anxiety are not caused by external events themselves, but by our judgments about those events, the stories we tell ourselves about what they mean. Leaders who internalize this distinction stop wasting precious energy and emotional capital fighting against storms they cannot calm. Instead, they learn to focus all their effort on steering their own ship, their own mind and conduct, with unwavering discipline. Consider Marcus Aurelius, the emperor we just met, who was literally watching his empire collapse from both within and without. The Antonine Plague, likely smallpox, swept through the Roman world, killing millions and decimating the army. The death toll was an external, an uncontrollable event of horrific magnitude. He could have raged against the gods, descended into despair, or become paralyzed by the sheer scale of the loss. But his personal journals, what we now call meditations, reveal a different response. He did not ignore the suffering, he accepted it as a reality outside his direct command. His focus turned inward to what was within his sphere of power, his duty, his judgment, his actions. He organized relief efforts, funded funeral rites for the poor, and continued to govern to the best of his ability. By concentrating on his own character and responsibilities, the things he could actually influence, he maintained his composure and provided stable leadership in a time of utter chaos. His power wasn't in stopping the plague, it was in choosing how he responded to it. Epictetus drives this point home in his manual, the Enchiridion, which translates to the handbook. The very first entry begins with this fundamental separation. He writes, "Some things are up to us and some are not up to us." It's a deceptively simple statement, but its application is profound. He explains that if you confuse what is yours, your capacity to choose, with what is not yours, like public opinion or another person's actions, you will inevitably meet with frustration, failure, and sorrow. You will blame others for your unhappiness and feel like a victim of circumstance. But when you correctly sort the world into these two categories, you unlock a deep and lasting freedom. External events may harm your body or take your possessions, but they cannot touch your inner citadel, your character, and your will unless you willingly hand them the keys. This is the ultimate source of composure, the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing your true domain of power. So let's bring this into your world for a moment. Think about a recent situation that caused you significant stress or anxiety. Maybe it was a negative comment from a colleague, a project that didn't go as planned, or worrying about a future event entirely outside your hands. Now apply the Stoic filter. In that scenario, what was truly within your control? You couldn't control the other person's words or attitude. That's an external. But you could control your reaction, your judgment of their comment as either hurtful or irrelevant, and your subsequent action, whether to engage constructively or to dismiss it and move on. You couldn't control every variable of the project, but you could control your preparation, your effort, and your adaptability when things changed. Worrying about the future outcome is focusing on an external. Preparing for it and focusing on the present step is focusing on an internal. This mental shift isn't about passive acceptance. It's about channeling your active effort with maximum efficiency into the only arena where you can truly make a difference, yourself. Imagine your mind as a fortress. What walls have you built, and what storms can it weather? This powerful metaphor lies at the heart of the second Stoic principle, the practice of cultivating an inner citadel. It's the idea that true composure doesn't come from a calm environment, but from building an unshakable inner self so resilient that external chaos simply cannot breach its walls. The Roman philosopher Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius, described this not as a withdrawal from the world, but as an active construction project for the soul. He argued that we must fortify our minds with reason and self-discipline, creating a sanctuary of peace that remains untouched by the turbulence of fortune, loss, or criticism. The goal isn't to become emotionless, but to achieve a profound stability where your sense of self and your peace are no longer dependent on things you cannot control. Seneca's letters on tranquility are a masterclass in this construction. In one particularly moving passage, he writes, "The person who has not mastered their desires will never master anything else." He isn't talking about suppressing wants, but about the power that comes from ordering them through reason. He describes a resilient inner life as one that can find contentment within itself, rather than constantly seeking validation or comfort from the outside world. For Seneca, this inner citadel is built brick by brick through daily practices, examining our judgments, questioning our fears, and consciously choosing virtue over convenience. It's the work of making your internal world so rich and well defended that the opinions of others, the failure of plans, or even personal misfortune become like weather against a strong roof, noticeable, perhaps, but ultimately unable to harm the foundation. We find one of history's most dramatic examples of this principle in the life of Cato the Younger, a staunch Stoic who lived through the violent death throes of the Roman Republic. During the civil wars, Cato found himself opposed by some of the most powerful and ruthless men of his age, first Julius Caesar and later Pompey. He was threatened, his property was confiscated, and his life was constantly in danger. The pressure to compromise his principles, to bend just slightly for the sake of safety or political gain, was immense, yet he never did. Cato's inner citadel was built on an unyielding commitment to the Republic and his own integrity. Even when his cause was militarily lost, he chose to take his own life rather than live under a dictator's rule, a final act that cemented his legacy as a man whose inner compass could not be broken by any external force. His power came from a source no army could defeat. So what does building your own inner citadel look like in the modern world? It starts with identifying the vulnerabilities in your current defenses. Perhaps you find your peace shattered by a critical comment online, or your mood dictated by the success or failure of your daily to-do list. Reinforcing your walls means consciously practicing self-discipline in small ways. Maybe that's pausing before reacting to a provocation, or dedicating time each day to reflection instead of distraction. It means feeding your mind with wisdom through reading and contemplation, and strengthening your resolve by consistently aligning your actions with your deepest values, not your immediate impulses. Your inner citadel is your ultimate source of freedom because it is the one thing no external event can ever take from you. Take a moment to reflect on what this idea means for you. What does your inner citadel look like right now? Are its walls strong, or are there cracks where the opinions of others or the fear of failure easily seep in? How might you begin to reinforce it, even just a little, starting today? Perhaps it's by setting a boundary to protect your peace, or by consciously deciding not to be offended by something minor. Every choice to act from principle rather than reaction is another stone placed firmly in your wall, another step toward an unshakable composure that can guide you through any collapse. What if every setback was actually a gift in disguise? This isn't just optimistic thinking, it's the core of a profound Stoic principle known as Amor Fati, a Latin phrase that translates to a love of one's fate. While the German philosopher Nietzsche later popularized this idea, its roots run deep into Stoic soil, particularly in the personal writings of Marcus Aurelius. He didn't see this as a passive resignation to whatever life threw at him, but as an active, enthusiastic embrace of every event, especially the difficult ones. For the Stoics, fate isn't something to be endured grudgingly. It's the raw material of life, and our task is to accept it willingly and find a way to use it for our growth. This shift in perspective transforms obstacles from roadblocks into the very path itself, the challenges that forge greater strength, wisdom, and character. We can see this active acceptance vividly in the pages of Meditations. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminds himself to not just tolerate, but to welcome the events that unfold. He writes, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." This is the essence of Amor Fati. He isn't saying the logs enjoy being burned. He's saying the fire uses them to become stronger and brighter. In another passage, he advises himself to think of every external obstacle as an opportunity for a new kind of action, a chance to exercise a virtue like patience, courage, or creativity. He viewed his own chronic pain and the endless political conspiracies against him not as personal curses, but as the specific training regimen the universe had provided for him to practice his philosophy. His composure came from trusting that there was a purpose, a lesson, or a strength to be gained in every single circumstance, no matter how harsh. History offers a powerful example of this principle in action with Thomas More, the 16th century English statesman and philosopher. When King Henry VIII demanded that More swear an oath acknowledging him as the head of the Church of England, More refused. He knew this act of conscience would lead directly to his execution. From the outside, this was a catastrophic setback, the loss of his position, his freedom, and ultimately his life. Yet his letters and behavior from the Tower of London reveal a man at peace, even joyful. He didn't see himself as a victim of a tyrant. He saw his execution as the final, necessary act of a life lived in alignment with his deepest values. He embraced his fate not with grim defeat, but with a calm acceptance, even telling his executioner on the scaffold that he wished him well. For More, this wasn't a tragedy. It was the fulfillment of his duty to his God, a fate he could love because it was inextricably woven with his virtue. This mindset is perhaps the ultimate application of the dichotomy of control. While we can't always control what happens to us, we have absolute control over how we relate to it. Amor Fati is the decision to not just accept the uncontrollable, but to love it, to find a way to be grateful for it precisely because it is our path, the unique set of circumstances we have been given to work with. It's the realization that a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor, and that our greatest growth almost always comes disguised as our greatest difficulties. This doesn't mean we shouldn't try to improve our situation. Stoicism is deeply practical, but it does mean that while we work to change what we can, we simultaneously embrace the reality of what is, seeing it as fertile ground rather than barren rock. Think about a recent difficulty you faced: a project that failed, a plan that fell apart, an unexpected rejection. Your initial reaction was likely frustration, disappointment, maybe even anger. Now try on the lens of Amor Fati. Ask yourself, what if this wasn't a misfortune but a necessary redirection? What strength did it force you to develop that you wouldn't have otherwise? What door might this have closed so that a better one could open? How does this specific challenge fit into the larger story of who you are becoming? By reframing the event not as a setback to be mourned but as a gift to be unpacked, you reclaim your power. You stop fighting reality and start working with it, and in doing so, you unlock a profound and unshakable source of composure. Picture looking down on Earth from space for a moment. See the swirling white clouds, the deep blue oceans, the silent turning of the planet against the immense blackness of the cosmos. From that vantage point, how significant does your daily stress, that urgent email, or that personal conflict truly appear? This shift in perspective is the heart of the fourth Stoic principle, a powerful mental exercise known as the view from above. It's a deliberate practice of zooming out, both spatially and temporally, to shrink our immediate crises down to their true size against the backdrop of the vast universe. Marcus Aurelius was a master of this technique, and he returned to it again and again in his private writings as a way to drain the drama and urgency from his problems, to see them not as monumental catastrophes but as small, manageable parts of a much larger, unfolding whole. In Meditations, he constantly reminds himself of this cosmic perspective to maintain his composure. He writes, "Keep always before your eyes how swiftly all things pass away, the immense emptiness of time already gone and yet to come." In another passage, he reflects on the sheer scale of the world, noting how many different peoples and cities exist, and how his own concerns are just a tiny speck within that vast tapestry. He wasn't doing this to diminish the importance of his work as emperor, but to free himself from the paralyzing weight of it. by consciously reflecting on the grand sweep of history and the unimaginable size of the cosmos. His immediate anxieties, a senator's betrayal, a military setback, lost their power to provoke a panicked or emotional reaction. This practice allowed him to respond to events with calm reason rather than be controlled by them. We can see this same principle applied by effective modern leaders navigating their own forms of collapse. Consider a CEO steering a company through a severe market crash. While others might be gripped by the panic of crashing stock prices and daily headlines, a leader practicing the view from above would mentally zoom out. They would focus on the company's core mission that spans decades, not days. They would remember that markets have always been cyclical, that this moment, however painful, is a single chapter in a much longer story. This perspective doesn't lead to inaction. It enables clearer, more strategic action. It prevents the leader from making desperate, short-sighted decisions that sacrifice long-term health for temporary relief. By focusing on the horizon and not just the waves crashing over the bow, they maintain a steady course through the storm. The true power of this exercise lies in its ability to rewire our emotional responses. When we feel overwhelmed, our focus becomes dangerously narrow. We magnify a single problem until it blocks out our entire field of vision. The view from above is the antidote to this cognitive distortion. It's a conscious intervention, a way to tell your brain, this feels huge, but let's look at it in its proper context. It's not about dismissing your problems as meaningless, but about seeing them in their true proportion. That difficult conversation, that financial worry, that professional rejection, they are real, but they are not the entirety of your existence. They are small stones in the river of your life, not the river itself. So the next time you feel that familiar surge of overwhelm, when the pressure starts to feel too intense, I encourage you to try this ancient Stoic tool. Close your eyes for just 30 seconds. Imagine yourself rising up above your room, your city, your country. See the curve of the planet, then pull back further, seeing the moon's orbit, the paths of the planets around the sun, and our solar system as just one of billions in the Milky Way. From there, look back at your current challenge. How does it look from that vantage point? This isn't about escaping your responsibilities. It's about returning to them with a calmer mind, a steadied hand, and the profound composure that comes from knowing you are part of something unimaginably vast, and that this too, whatever it is, shall pass. What's the worst that could happen in your life right now? Not the minor inconveniences, but the truly seismic shifts: losing your job, a serious health diagnosis, the end of a cherished relationship. Now, instead of pushing that terrifying thought away as we instinctively do, imagine facing that possibility not with dread, but with a sense of calm readiness. This is the essence of the fifth Stoic principle, a powerful and often misunderstood practice known as Premeditatio Malorum, which translates to the premeditation of evils. Far from being a pessimistic exercise in fear-mongering, this was a deliberate psychological tool used by the Stoics to disarm anxiety, build resilience, and ultimately, to appreciate the present moment with profound gratitude. It's the practice of mentally rehearsing adversity so that if it ever arrives, it finds you prepared, and if it never does, it finds you more thankful for what you have. The Roman philosopher Seneca was a chief architect of this concept, and he wrote about it extensively in his letters to his friend Lucilius. In one powerful passage, he advises, "He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand." He wasn't suggesting we live in a state of constant worry about the future. Instead, he was advocating for a kind of mental vaccination. By exposing our minds to a controlled dose of a feared future event, we build up our emotional antibodies. Seneca encourages us to regularly reflect on the fragility of our possessions, our status, and even our loved ones. He writes that we should tell ourselves, "You are not going to lose any of these things. You cannot be sure. The time for losing them is uncertain, but the fact that they can be lost is certain." This isn't meant to make us sad. It's designed to shatter our sense of entitlement to the good things in our lives and replace it with a deep, active appreciation. By accepting the possibility of loss, we cease to take our current blessings for granted. We can see this principle in action, not just in ancient texts, but in the conduct of great leaders throughout history. Consider George Washington during the darkest days of the American Revolutionary War. The Continental Army faced overwhelming odds. They were undermanned, underfunded, and often on the verge of disintegration through desertion and disease. Washington didn't ignore these grim realities. He consistently premeditated the worst: a decisive defeat, the capture of his army, the collapse of the revolutionary cause. His letters to the Continental Congress are filled with stark, honest assessments of his dire situation. But this mental rehearsal of failure wasn't paralyzing, it was empowering. By staring directly at the potential for catastrophe, he was able to develop contingency plans, rally his men with clear-eyed resolve, and make strategic decisions from a place of calculated preparedness rather than panicked reaction. His composure under immense pressure was born from having already walked through the worst-case scenario in his mind. The true genius of Premeditatio Malorum lies in its twofold benefit. First, it reduces the sting of surprise and fear when difficulties actually arise. A problem you have mentally rehearsed feels familiar when it arrives. It's an expected guest, however unwelcome, rather than a terrifying intruder breaking down your door. This allows you to respond with reason instead of being hijacked by raw emotion. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it dramatically enhances your enjoyment of the present. When you consciously imagine life without your health, your job, or your family, you are momentarily gifted with the perspective of having lost them. Then, when you pull yourself back to the present reality and see that they are still here, you experience a surge of gratitude. That morning coffee isn't just routine, it's a gift. The presence of a loved one isn't just assumed, it's cherished. So I invite you to try this Stoic exercise for yourself. Bring to mind one thing you deeply fear losing, perhaps your financial stability, a key relationship, or your reputation. Now give yourself a few minutes to truly visualize that loss in detail. Don't just skim the surface, sit with the emotional weight of it, then shift your focus. Ask yourself, how would a Stoic respond, not with collapse or despair, but with calm acceptance and reasoned action? What is within your control even in that scenario? Your character, your efforts, your judgment. By planning your response in advance, you drain the future of its anxiety and arm yourself with a composure that can withstand any storm. How often do you react instantly to a situation, only to regret it later? That moment of hot anger, that flash of defensive pride, that surge of anxiety, these immediate, visceral responses are precisely what the sixth Stoic principle, the discipline of Assent, is designed to master. Epictetus, the philosopher who transformed his own life from slavery to a position of immense moral influence, placed this concept at the very core of his teachings. He introduced a powerful and liberating idea. Between any external event and our emotional reaction, there exists a critical space, a momentary pause. In that space lies our ultimate freedom, the power to either grant our assent to an initial impression or to withhold it, to question its validity before we allow it to shape our judgment and dictate our actions. Epictetus masterfully breaks down this internal process in his discourses. He describes how our minds are constantly bombarded with impressions, the raw data of our experience. Someone criticizes our work, That's the impression. Our immediate feeling of insult or anger is not the impression itself, but our almost instantaneous assent to the impression that this is a terrible personal attack. Epictetus teaches that this assent is where we often go wrong. We treat these initial, emotionally charged interpretations as undeniable facts, when in reality, they are merely suggestions, one possible way of viewing the event. The discipline, then, is to insert a moment of conscious awareness between the impression and our endorsement of it. It's the mental equivalent of catching a ball that's been thrown at you, examining it carefully in your hands, and then deciding whether to keep it or toss it aside, rather than just instinctively catching it and getting hit in the face. Consider a modern leader facing a wave of intense public criticism on social media. The impression is the notification, the negative comment, the dropping approval rating. The initial, unexamined assent might be a surge of panic, a feeling of being personally attacked and unjustly treated, and a powerful impulse to fire off a defensive, emotional rebuttal to set the record straight. A leader who has practiced the discipline of assent, however, would catch that initial impression and hold it up to the light of reason before reacting. They would pause and ask themselves Epictetan questions. Is this criticism entirely true, partially true? Is the person attacking me, or are they attacking a policy or an outcome? What is within my control here? My reputation is an external, but my response is not. By withholding immediate assent to the impression of catastrophe and personal insult, the leader creates the space to craft a response that is measured, thoughtful, and constructive, perhaps acknowledging valid concerns, clarifying misunderstandings without malice, or simply choosing not to engage with pure vitriol. This composure under fire doesn't come from suppressing emotion, but from mastering the gatekeeper of assent. This ancient practice is incredibly relevant in our age of instant communication and perpetual outrage. Our digital environment is practically engineered to hijack our assent, to trigger immediate emotional reactions that drive clicks and shares. The discipline of assent is the antidote to this manipulation. It's a reclaiming of your own cognitive sovereignty. It's recognizing that you are not your first thought. You are the person who gets to decide what you do with that thought. Every time we pause before replying to a provoking email, every time we take a deep breath before responding to a provocation, we are exercising this stoic muscle. We are choosing to act from a place of principle rather than react from a place of impulse. I want you to bring to mind one recent situation where you had a strong, immediate emotional reaction. Perhaps it was a conversation that turned into an argument, or a piece of news that sent you into a spiral of worry. Now replay that moment in your mind, but this time insert the pause. Imagine yourself as the observer of that initial impression, catching the thought before it catches you. What if you had questioned it? What if you had asked, is this interpretation absolutely true? What other way could I look at this? That simple act of withholding immediate judgment is the birthplace of true composure. The moment you stop being a passenger on your emotional roller coaster and start being the driver. You could die tomorrow. What would you do differently today? This stark, unsettling question lies at the heart of the seventh Stoic principle, Memento Mori, a Latin phrase that translates to "remember you must die." Far from being a morbid fixation or a cause for despair, the Stoics saw this daily meditation as one of the most powerful and liberating tools for creating a life of purpose, urgency, and profound composure. It is the practice of keeping your own mortality consciously in mind, not to paralyze you with fear, but to energize you with clarity. By regularly confronting the finite nature of our time, we are jolted out of complacency and forced to ask the most important question: if my days are numbered, how should I spend them? For a leader navigating collapse, this isn't a distraction. It's the ultimate focusing mechanism, cutting through the noise of trivial concerns and aligning every action with what truly matters. Marcus Aurelius returned to this theme constantly in his private writings, using it as a whetstone to sharpen his virtue and focus. He didn't view death as a terrifying specter to be avoided in thought, but as a natural, inevitable process woven into the fabric of life itself. In Meditations, he writes, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This was his personal operating system. He reminded himself that even an emperor's power is temporary, that his reign, however grand, was just a brief moment in the vast sweep of history. This perspective didn't make him passive, it made him purposeful. It freed him from the petty anxieties of court politics and the fear of others' opinions, allowing him to concentrate on his duty to the common good with a clear and steady mind. His composure stemmed from the understanding that while he couldn't control the length of his life, he could absolutely control its depth and integrity. This ancient wisdom found a powerful modern echo in the life and work of Steve Jobs. In his famous 2005 Stanford commencement address, Jobs spoke candidly about how being diagnosed with a terminal illness shaped his outlook. He said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life." He explained that the fear of failure, pride, and embarrassment all fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly essential. This Memento Mori mindset didn't lead him to resignation. It fueled a relentless drive for innovation and authenticity. Knowing that time was precious, he refused to live with the results of other people's thinking. He embraced bold, visionary projects, understanding that the ultimate failure wasn't making a mistake, but failing to try something meaningful because of fear. His composure in the face of business setbacks and immense pressure was rooted in this larger perspective, the awareness that these were just chapters in a finite story. The true power of this practice lies in its ability to instantly recalibrate our priorities. Think about the things that typically consume your mental energy: a frustrating commute, a critical comment from a colleague, the nagging worry about a future meeting. Now hold the thought of your mortality alongside those concerns. Suddenly, their size and significance shift dramatically. The traffic jam becomes a minor inconvenience, not a ruinous event. The criticism becomes data to be considered, not a personal wound. This isn't about minimizing life's challenges, but about viewing them from the truest, widest lens available. The leader who remembers death is less likely to be thrown off course by daily dramas and more likely to invest their energy in building a legacy that outlasts them. Whether that's a stronger community, a meaningful project, or simply a reputation for integrity and kindness. So I invite you to sit with this idea for a moment, not as a dark cloud but as a clarifying light. How would your approach to today change if you held the awareness that it could be your last? Not in a panicked way, but in a purposeful one. Would you waste an hour scrolling through social media, or would you reach out to someone you love? Would you remain silent in a meeting to avoid rocking the boat, or would you voice the important idea that needs to be heard? This practice isn't about crafting a dramatic bucket list. It's about infusing your ordinary moments with extraordinary intention. It's about recognizing that composure in the face of chaos comes from knowing, deep in your bones, that you are spending your irreplaceable time on things that truly count. What if you sought out discomfort instead of avoiding it? This counterintuitive challenge lies at the heart of the 8th Stoic principle, a deliberate practice known as the art of voluntary discomfort. In a world that relentlessly pursues ease, convenience, and the path of least resistance, the Stoics proposed a radically different approach: periodically and intentionally choosing to step into hardship, not as a form of self-punishment, but as a form of training. Think of it as a vaccine for the soul. By injecting a small, controlled dose of difficulty, you build up a powerful immunity to the fear and anxiety that unexpected adversity can bring. Seneca, the wealthy advisor to the Emperor Nero, was a passionate advocate for this practice. He argued that a life of unbroken comfort is actually incredibly fragile. Like a muscle that has never been used, the first real challenge it faces will cause it to tear. To prevent this, he advised his friend Lucilius to regularly practice poverty. He wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" This exercise wasn't about becoming ascetic. It was about conducting a reality check. By willingly experiencing a simpler life, you prove to yourself that you can survive it and even thrive within it, thereby robbing poverty of its terrifying power over your imagination. This philosophy was echoed by another influential Stoic teacher, Musonius Rufus, who took the idea even further into the realm of daily living. He taught that pursuing philosophy wasn't just about reading books, it was about physically hardening oneself against life's inevitable hardships. He believed comfort was the enemy of virtue, writing that luxury makes the body weak and the soul sluggish. To build a resilient character, he prescribed tangible acts of endurance, embracing cold weather without excessive layers, eating simple foods, sleeping on a hard bed, and engaging in physical labor. For Musonius, these weren't moments of suffering to be endured, but opportunities for triumph. Each small act of voluntary discomfort was a victory over fear and desire, a concrete step toward the ultimate Stoic goal of freedom from being controlled by your cravings for pleasure and your aversion to pain. By choosing the harder path when an easier one is available, you are not making your life worse. You are making yourself stronger, more adaptable, and ultimately more free. We can see this Stoic principle vividly embodied in the life of a much later historical figure, Theodore Roosevelt. Though not a formal Stoic, Roosevelt's entire philosophy of life was built upon what he called the strenuous life. He believed that the comfort and ease of modern civilization could lead to softness and decadence, and he consciously fought against this in himself. He engaged in brutal physical workouts, mastered jiu-jitsu, went on grueling hunting expeditions, and led the famously arduous Rough Riders cavalry unit. Roosevelt wasn't a masochist, he was a strategist. He understood that by voluntarily seeking out physical and mental challenge, he was forging a temperament capable of handling the immense pressures of leadership, from navigating political scandals to mediating international conflicts. His renowned resilience and boundless energy were not accidental traits. They were the direct result of his lifelong practice of the art of voluntary discomfort, building a reservoir of toughness he could draw upon when true crises emerged. So what does this look like for us in a world of central heating, food delivery apps, and endless entertainment? It doesn't mean you have to sell your possessions and sleep on the floor. It starts with tiny, deliberate choices that interrupt your automatic pursuit of comfort. It could be taking a cold shower for the first minute of your morning routine, not because you enjoy it, but to practice mastering your instinct to immediately escape an unpleasant sensation. It could be choosing to walk or bike to work on a cold day instead of driving, or fasting from social media or streaming services for a full 24 hours. The goal isn't the action itself, it's the mental shift that occurs during the action. It's the moment you feel the urge to quit and you consciously decide to continue. In that small space, you are building resilience. You are proving to yourself that you are more capable than your cravings, that your will is stronger than your discomfort. This practice builds a deep-seated confidence that no matter what happens, you have the inner fortitude to handle it. This week, I encourage you to select one small, safe act of voluntary discomfort. Perhaps it's skipping a meal you look forward to, leaving your phone at home during a walk, or doing an extra set of exercises when you feel like stopping. As you do it, pay attention not just to the discomfort, but to what happens afterward. Notice the sense of pride and self-reliance that emerges. Observe how your ordinary comforts feel richer and more appreciated when you return to them. This isn't about building a life of hardship. It's about ensuring that a life of comfort doesn't make you weak. It's about knowing from experience that your capacity to endure and find joy extends far beyond the boundaries of your daily routine. Think of a time you faced intense opposition. How did you hold your ground without losing your cool? That challenge, the moment when pressure mounts and every instinct screams to fight back or retreat, is where the ninth Stoic principle, practicing equanimity in conflict, becomes your most powerful asset. Equanimity isn't about being passive or indifferent. It's the disciplined art of maintaining inner calm and outer fairness even when you're being attacked, criticized, or confronted. For the Stoics, this was a non-negotiable leadership trait because they understood that a leader who loses their composure in a storm has already capsized the ship. Marcus Aurelius constantly wrestled with this in his private journals, reminding himself that his primary duty was not to be disturbed by the actions of others. He wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." This is a radical reframing of conflict. It shifts the goal from winning the argument or silencing the critic to preserving your own character and reason above all else. Your victory isn't in the other person's surrender, but in your ability to remain just patient and unwavering in your principles, regardless of their behavior. Marcus Aurelius offers profound practical advice for this in Meditations. He advises himself to see difficult people not as enemies to be defeated, but as misguided souls acting from their own ignorance of what is truly good. He writes, "When people injure you, ask yourself what good or harm they thought would come of it. If you understand that, you'll feel sympathy rather than outrage or anger." This isn't a call to be a doormat. It's a strategic psychological move to de-escalate your own emotional response. By seeking to understand the why behind someone's hostility, you automatically engage your rational mind and create a buffer between their action and your reaction. You stop seeing their behavior as a personal affront and start seeing it as a data point about their current state of mind. This perspective allows you to respond from a place of clarity rather than defensiveness, to address the root of the issue rather than just the heated words being exchanged. Your calmness then becomes a tool, often disarming the conflict entirely and creating space for a more productive resolution. We see this Stoic equanimity perfected not in ancient Rome, but in the modern civil rights movement, particularly in the philosophy and actions of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his followers. They faced unimaginable opposition, violent mobs, hateful rhetoric, systemic injustice, and legalized oppression. The natural human response to such hostility would be rage, bitterness, and a desire for retaliation. Yet the movement was rooted in the principle of nonviolent resistance, a discipline that required immense Stoic composure. Protesters were trained to meet curses with silence, violence with peaceful dignity, and hatred with unwavering resolve. They held their ground not by physically overpowering their opponents, but by morally overshadowing them. Their equanimity in the face of brutality was a powerful demonstration of their cause's righteousness. It exposed the brutality of the opposition for what it was and appealed to the conscience of the nation. This was strategic, but it was also deeply philosophical, a belief that responding to injustice with further injustice only perpetuates a cycle, while responding with calm, reasoned, and virtuous action breaks it and paves the way for true change. This principle is just as critical in our daily lives, in conflicts far less dramatic but equally capable of rattling our composure. It applies to the heated family debate over the holiday dinner, the tense disagreement with a colleague in a meeting, or the frustrating argument with a customer service representative. In each case, the dynamic is the same. An external force is applying pressure, and your internal equanimity is your only true defense. The goal isn't to avoid the conflict or to immediately resolve it on your terms. The goal is to navigate it without surrendering your own peace of mind and integrity. This means listening actively even when you're being misunderstood, speaking clearly without raising your voice, and sticking to the facts of the issue rather than attacking the person. It means being willing to say, "I need a moment to think about that," instead of firing off a reactive reply you'll regret. Your calm presence can single-handedly lower the temperature of a room and create the conditions for a real solution to emerge. Now, bring to mind a specific conflict from your own recent past. It could be a professional disagreement, a clash with a friend, or a recurring argument with a family member. Replay the scene in your mind. How did you feel in your body? What was your initial gut reaction? Now, imagine applying the lens of Stoic equanimity. What if, in that moment, you had taken one deep breath and asked yourself Marcus Aurelius's question? What good did this person think would come from their action? How might that have changed your perception of their behavior? What if your primary objective had shifted from proving your point to maintaining your own calm and fairness? What might you have said or done differently? This reflection isn't about self-criticism, it's about preparation. By reviewing past conflicts with this new tool, you are building the mental muscle memory to wield it instinctively the next time opposition arises, allowing you to hold your ground not with force but with unshakable, graceful composure. What mission is so important that it keeps you steady when everything else shakes? This question lies at the very core of the 10th Stoic principle, the profound role that purpose and duty play in building unshakable composure. For the Stoics, inner peace was never about withdrawing from the world to seek private tranquility. It was about engaging with the world so deeply and meaningfully that your actions became anchored to something far greater than your personal desires or fears. They discovered that the most reliable antidote to anxiety and distraction is a clear, unwavering commitment to a purpose that transcends the self, a duty to contribute to the common good. This sense of mission acts as a psychological North Star, providing direction and stability when the seas of life become turbulent and chaotic, ensuring that your energy is channeled into meaningful action rather than dissipated by worry. Marcus Aurelius provides perhaps the most powerful personal example of this principle in action. As emperor, he wielded immense power, yet his private journals reveal a man constantly wrestling with the burdens of leadership and the temptations of ego. He grounded himself not in his title but in his duty. He repeatedly framed his immense responsibilities not as a personal burden, but as a service to humanity. In Meditations, he writes, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee." This simple, beautiful metaphor captures the Stoic view of our interconnectedness. Our personal well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of the whole. For Marcus, every decision, every challenge, every moment of frustration was an opportunity to live up to this duty. He reminded himself, "I am bound to do good to men and bear with them, and men exist for the sake of one another." By viewing his role through this lens of service, he transformed the overwhelming pressure of ruling a collapsing empire into a series of manageable, virtuous actions. His composure was a byproduct of this focus. He was too busy doing what was right for his people to be overly concerned with his own comfort or reputation. This transformative power of purpose is not confined to ancient history. We see it embodied in the 20th century by Nelson Mandela, whose 27 years of imprisonment could have broken his spirit and fueled a desire for bitter vengeance. Instead, his unwavering sense of purpose, his duty to the idea of a free and democratic South Africa for all its people, became the anchor that held him steady. Prison became not a place of defeat, but a crucible that purified his resolve and strategic thinking. He later wrote that his sense of mission allowed him to see his jailers not as monsters, but as products of a system he was duty-bound to change. This perspective, deeply Stoic in its nature, prevented him from being consumed by hatred and allowed him to emerge with the composure necessary to lead a fractured nation toward reconciliation. His personal suffering was real, but it was rendered meaningful because it was endured in service of a cause far larger than himself. His purpose provided a framework that made even immense suffering manageable. Defining your own sense of purpose doesn't require you to lead a nation or endure imprisonment. It begins with a simple but profound question: what is your role in your own hive? What is the unique contribution you are positioned to make within your family, your community, or your profession? Your purpose might be raising compassionate children, creating a supportive and productive environment for your team at work, contributing to your local community through volunteer work, or simply being a reliable and kind presence for those around you. The scale is irrelevant, the clarity is everything. A purpose provides a filter for your decisions. When you know what you are truly working toward, it becomes easier to say no to distractions and to endure short-term hardships. A setback becomes a learning experience on the path to your goal, not a personal failure. Criticism becomes feedback that helps you serve better, not a wound to your ego. Take a few moments to truly reflect on this. Beyond your daily tasks and responsibilities, what is the deeper mission that gives those tasks meaning? What legacy do you wish to build through your actions, however small they may seem? Is it to foster understanding, to create beauty, to alleviate suffering? To build something lasting, your purpose is your anchor. Write it down, keep it somewhere you can see it, and the next time you feel overwhelmed by chaos or uncertainty, return to that statement. Ask yourself, what is one action I can take right now, no matter how small, that aligns with this purpose? This simple act of reorientation shifts your focus from the storm raging around you to the steady helm in your hands, allowing you to navigate any collapse with the profound composure that can only come from knowing exactly why you are sailing. How much of your mental energy is consumed each day by worrying about what others think of you? That nagging concern about your reputation, the anxiety over a critical comment, the subtle shaping of your actions to win approval. This is one of the most common and draining forms of mental slavery, and it was a challenge the Stoics addressed with ruthless clarity. Epictetus, who knew a thing or two about living under the judgment of others, having been born a slave, framed the solution with his characteristic directness. He drew a bright line between what is ours and what is not. Our character, our intentions, our efforts, these are within our control. They are our property. But our reputation, the opinions of others, whether we are praised or blamed, these are externals, entirely outside our command. He argued that the moment we confuse the two, the moment we hand over the keys to our self-worth to the unpredictable and fickle judgments of other people, we surrender our inner peace and our freedom. True composure, therefore, doesn't come from being universally liked or admired. It comes from a profound indifference to whether we are liked or admired at all, so long as we are acting with virtue and integrity. This isn't a call to become arrogant or dismissive of feedback. Epictetus was a teacher. He valued learning and improvement. The crucial distinction lies in the source of the feedback and our motivation for heeding it. Listening to a wise mentor to correct a fault in your character is focusing on an internal, something you can control. Altering your behavior because you fear the gossip of people whose values you don't even respect is focusing on an external, and it is a recipe for anxiety and inauthenticity. Epictetus drives this home in his teachings, advising us to care more about the character of the people who praise us than about the praise itself. He famously said that if someone told him that someone else was speaking ill of him, his reply would be that the person clearly doesn't know his other faults, or else they would have mentioned those too. This humorous deflection isn't false modesty, it's a demonstration of ultimate immunity. It shows that his self-assessment is not dependent on external validation. His composure is rooted in his own understanding of his virtues and his flaws, making him untouchable by the opinions of others. We see this principle embodied with breathtaking courage in the figure of Socrates, arguably the patron saint of philosophical composure under social pressure. Put on trial in Athens on charges of corrupting the youth and impiety, Socrates faced a choice that would define his legacy. He could apologize, temper his teachings, and likely receive a lenient sentence. This would have been the path of managing external expectations by conforming to them. Instead, he chose the Stoic path long before Stoicism existed. He stayed utterly true to his principles and his philosophical mission, even though he knew it would cost him his life. During his trial, he told the jury, "An unexamined life is not worth living." He prioritized his inner duty to truth and self-integrity over his external desire for acquittal or a good reputation. Even after being condemned to death, his friends arranged an easy escape for him, but he refused. He calmly accepted his sentence, drinking the hemlock without rancor or fear, demonstrating that his composure was not dependent on his circumstances, but on his unwavering commitment to living and dying in accordance with his own values. His reputation in that moment was in tatters, but his character was impeccable. This ancient wisdom is desperately needed in our modern world of social media, where the currency is literally the external validation of likes, shares, and comments. Our online personas can become carefully curated performances designed to maximize approval, a process that subtly erodes our authentic selves and makes our sense of worth terrifyingly fragile. The fear of a negative comment or a cancelled project can become paralyzing. The Stoic antidote is to perform a constant reality check to continually ask, is this action I'm taking, this word I'm writing, coming from a place of inner conviction, or is it primarily designed to manage how others will perceive me? It's about shifting the audience for your life from the external crowd to the internal judge of your own character. Your goal ceases to be popularity and becomes integrity. Your focus moves from your reputation to your actions. This shift is liberating because it places your emotional well-being back into your own hands where it belongs. So I want you to take a moment for a brutally honest inventory. Identify one specific area in your life where the fear of other people's judgment is currently holding you back. Is it a creative project you're afraid to launch because it might be criticized? A conversation you need to have but are avoiding because of the potential backlash? A boundary you need to set but fear will make you seem difficult? Now apply the Stoic filter. The outcome of that project, the other person's reaction, their opinion of you, these are externals outside your control. What is within your control? Your effort on the project, your courage in initiating the conversation, your respect for your own needs by setting the boundary. How might your approach change if you committed to the action purely for its own sake, because it is the right and virtuous thing to do, and then mentally handed the external results over to fate? This practice isn't about guaranteeing success. It's about guaranteeing your self-respect and composure, regardless of the outcome. Before you sleep, do you judge your day, or does your day judge you? This question gets to the heart of a transformative Stoic practice known as evening reflection, a deliberate habit of reviewing the events of the day to learn from your mistakes, reinforce your virtuous actions, and prepare your mind for a restful night and a more purposeful tomorrow. For the Stoics, this wasn't a passive replay of the day's highs and lows. It was an active, disciplined audit of their own character, a way to ensure they were living in alignment with their principles and continuously refining their ability to maintain composure. Seneca, in his moral letters to Lucilius, championed this practice as the single most important habit for philosophical progress. He described it as a form of daily justice we must administer upon ourselves, writing, "I will keep a kind of watch over myself each day, and each night I will make a review of the day's doings." This is what makes us wicked, that none of us looks back over our own life. For Seneca, the unexamined day was a day wasted, a missed opportunity to strengthen the inner citadel and become a more rational, virtuous human being. Seneca's letters provide a clear blueprint for how to conduct this self-examination. He advised his friend to retreat into the privacy of his own mind at the end of each day and ask himself a series of probing questions. What bad habit have you put right today? What fault have you resisted? In what respect are you better? He wasn't looking for grand, sweeping answers. He was looking for honest, incremental progress. The goal was to identify the moments where he had succumbed to anger, acted out of vanity, or wasted time on trivial pursuits. But crucially, it was also to acknowledge the moments where he had exercised patience, shown courage, or acted with kindness. This balanced review prevented the practice from becoming an exercise in self-flagellation. It was about calibrating your moral compass, celebrating the small wins that reinforced your virtue, and making a mental note to correct the missteps, not to dwell on them with guilt. This nightly ritual was how a Stoic ensured they were the judge of their own character, rather than being judged and found wanting by their own unconscious habits. We know that Marcus Aurelius, the emperor-philosopher, embodied this practice, though his approach was less a formal cue and more a continuous, flowing conversation with himself. His personal journal, which we now know as Meditations, is essentially the greatest surviving example of Stoic evening reflection in history. It was never intended for publication. It was his private gymnasium for the mind. On its pages, he dissects his own reactions, admonishes himself for petty thoughts, reminds himself of his duty, and reinforces his core principles. He writes, "When you have difficulty getting out of bed in the morning, remember that your defining characteristic, what defines a human being, is to work with others." This reads less like an abstract philosophical idea and more like a note to self, a lesson learned from a previous day's struggle with laziness. His entire journal is a masterclass in this nightly course correction, a testament to how he built and maintained his legendary composure under unimaginable pressure by constantly holding his own thoughts and actions up to the light of his Stoic values. This ancient practice is far from obsolete. It's been adopted by some of the most effective modern leaders as a tool for maintaining clarity and strategic focus. Many high-performing executives and military leaders dedicate time each evening to a brief review of the day's decisions, interactions, and outcomes. They aren't just tracking tasks, they are assessing their own leadership behavior. Did they listen effectively in that tense meeting, or did they interrupt? Did they make that difficult decision from a place of courage or a place of fear? This process creates a powerful feedback loop that accelerates growth and prevents the repetition of errors. It transforms experience into genuine wisdom. By calmly reviewing the day's events after the heat of the moment has passed, they can analyze their composure, or lack thereof, with a dispassionate eye, planning how to approach similar challenges with greater virtue and effectiveness in the future. The true beauty of this practice is its simplicity and accessibility. You don't need to be an emperor or a CEO to benefit from it. The invitation is to try it for yourself for just 1 week. Before you turn out the light, take 5 minutes with a notebook or just your thoughts. Ask yourself Seneca's questions. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short of my own standards? What was one trigger that caused me to lose a bit of my composure, and what can I learn from that? The goal isn't to create a list of faults, but to create a plan for gentle, continuous improvement. You might find that this simple act of closing the day with intention not only brings a sense of calm and closure, but also begins to subtly reshape your awareness during the day as you start to live with the gentle anticipation of your own nightly review. This is how we become active authors of our own character, judging our days with kindness and clarity rather than being helplessly judged by them. Everything you have and everyone you love is on loan from the universe. This poetic yet piercingly truthful observation captures the essence of the 13th Stoic principle, the profound practice of embracing impermanence. The Stoics didn't see the constant flux of life as a tragedy to be mourned, but as the fundamental nature of reality to be understood and accepted. They believed that a significant portion of our anxiety, our fear, and our suffering stems from a single source, our deep-seated attachment to things that are, by their very nature, temporary. Our health, our possessions, our social status, and even our relationships are not permanent possessions. They are gifts granted for an uncertain duration. Composure, then, is not found in trying to build a permanent fortress in a river of change, but in learning to flow with the current, appreciating the water while understanding it will never stop moving. Marcus Aurelius returns to this theme with the persistence of a mantra throughout meditations, using it as a tool to ground himself in reality and drain potential disappointments of their power. He writes, "Keep in mind how fast things pass by and are gone those that are now and those to come. Existence flows past us like a river." He constantly reminds himself that everything he sees, everyone he knows, is already in the process of dying and renewal. This wasn't a morbid fixation for him, it was a source of liberation. By fully accepting that change is the only constant, he prevented himself from being caught off guard by loss. He saw himself as a part of this natural order, not an exception to it. In another passage, he reflects on the generations of people who came before him, all with their own passions, dreams, and triumphs, now largely forgotten. This view from above, on time, humbled his personal concerns and reinforced the idea that his own struggles and achievements were part of a vast, endless cycle. This perspective didn't make his efforts meaningless. It made them part of something larger, freeing him from the weight of his own self-importance and the paralyzing fear of loss. We can observe the power of this principle in the actions of leaders who have successfully guided others through periods of radical and unwelcome change. Consider a leader navigating a severe economic collapse, where companies that stood for generations vanish overnight and entire industries are rendered obsolete. A leader clinging to impermanence would desperately try to resurrect the old way, pouring resources into saving what cannot be saved. A leader who has embraced the Stoic acceptance of flux, however, would acknowledge the loss with clear eyes, but would immediately pivot their focus to what is emerging. Their composure would come from understanding that collapse often clears the ground for new growth. They would channel their energy not into mourning the past, but into building the new structures required for the future, adapting their strategies and reassuring their people not with false promises of a return to normalcy, but with a confident vision for a different, yet still meaningful path forward. Their calm is contagious because it is rooted in a realistic acceptance of reality, not a desperate denial of it. This practice is ultimately about trading the fragility of attachment for the resilience of appreciation. When we believe something is permanently ours, we shift from cherishing it to possessing it. We become fearful of losing it, and that very fear can poison our enjoyment of it in the present moment. The Stoic alternative is to consciously view everything and everyone as a temporary guest in our lives. This doesn't mean loving your family any less. In fact, it means loving them more deeply and presently, because you are acutely aware that your time with them is finite and precious. It means being grateful for your health today without assuming it will be there tomorrow. It means enjoying your success without building your identity upon it. This mindset transforms gratitude from a passive feeling into an active, daily practice. You stop taking things for granted because you know they are on loan, and a loan, by definition, will one day be called in. I want you to take a quiet moment to sit with this idea. What is one thing in your life that you are holding onto too tightly? It might be a physical possession you fear losing, a specific vision for how your career should unfold, or even a particular role you play within your family or social group. Now, gently apply the lens of impermanence. Acknowledge that this thing, this plan, this identity is not a permanent part of your story. How does that acknowledgement feel? Does it bring a sense of fear or perhaps a surprising sense of relief? Letting go of the demand for permanence isn't about giving up, it's about lightening your load. It's about making peace with the river of change so you can finally lift your head up and enjoy the ride. In a world full of noise, when is your silence more powerful than your words? We often default to the belief that leadership means having the answers, speaking with authority, and directing the conversation. But the Stoics uncovered a profound counterintuitive truth, that true strength and composure are often found not in what we say, but in our ability to consciously choose when not to speak at all. This 14th principle, the power of silence and listening, is a sophisticated tool for navigating chaos. In the midst of a crisis, when panic tempts everyone to speak quickly and act rashly, the most composed person in the room is frequently the one who is listening intently, processing information fully, and reserving judgment until the right moment. This isn't passive or weak. It is an active, disciplined practice of restraint that creates space for clarity to emerge from the confusion. The Stoic school's founder, Zeno of Citium, placed immense value on this measured approach to communication. He famously advocated for listening twice as much as speaking, a philosophy embodied in the design of the human head itself, with 2 ears and only 1 mouth. For Zeno and his followers, reckless or excessive speech was a sign of a disordered mind, a soul that was being tossed about by external impressions rather than guided by inner reason. The goal of conversation wasn't to dominate or to impress, but to understand and to learn. This requires the composure to endure the temporary discomfort of silence, to resist the urge to fill every pause with your own voice, and to value the quality of your words over the quantity. In a collapse where misinformation and emotional reactions spread like wildfire, this Stoic discipline acts as a filter, ensuring that when you do finally speak, your words carry weight, truth, and purposeful direction. Epictetus, the former slave whose teachings were entirely focused on achieving inner freedom, offered some of the most practical advice on this matter. In his discourses, he provides a simple but powerful filter for every potential utterance. First, learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak. This single sentence dismantles our modern culture of reactive commentary. He is urging us to move beyond the impulsive need to have an immediate opinion on everything. Before you speak, ask yourself, do I truly understand this situation? Is what I am about to say true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Does it serve a purpose greater than simply hearing my own voice or asserting my dominance? This internal checkpoint is the essence of Stoic composure. It transforms speech from a reflex into a choice, and in doing so, it prevents the countless minor conflicts and major errors that stem from words spoken in haste, anger, or ignorance. We can see the immense strategic value of this principle in the actions of great leaders facing high-stakes decisions. Consider a general in the fog of war, receiving a torrent of conflicting reports from the front lines. The instinctive reaction might be to issue immediate commands based on the first piece of convincing information, but a leader practicing Stoic silence would first create a container for listening. They would hear out each messenger, their tone, their uncertainties, and the gaps in their stories. They would absorb the chaos without adding to it with their own premature conclusions. This deliberate pause, this intentional silence, allows them to synthesize a more accurate picture of the battlefield, to distinguish signal from noise, and to craft a strategic response rather than a panicked reaction. Their ultimate order, precisely because it was delayed, is far more likely to be correct and effective, saving lives and securing objectives. Their power in that moment came from their disciplined silence, not from their volume. This practice is just as critical in our personal and professional lives, where the battles are meetings, negotiations, and difficult conversations. The next time you find yourself in a heated discussion, I challenge you to try a simple experiment. Make it your primary goal not to win the argument, but to understand the other person's perspective so completely that you could articulate it back to them to their satisfaction. This requires embracing intentional silence. When they finish speaking, resist the immediate urge to rebut. Hold the silence for 3 full seconds. Use that space to truly consider their words, to separate their emotional charge from their core message, and to formulate a response that addresses the real issue, not just your defensive reaction. You will likely find that this Stoic restraint de-escalates tension, builds trust, and leads to far more productive outcomes than any brilliant monologue ever could. Observe the effects not just on the conversation, but on your own inner state, the composure that comes from being the calm, listening center of the storm. What if you could find something to be thankful for, even now, in the midst of your greatest struggle or loss? This seemingly counterintuitive idea is not about denying pain or plastering on a fake smile, but about accessing one of the most potent tools in the Stoic arsenal for maintaining emotional equilibrium, the deliberate cultivation of gratitude. In times of collapse, when it feels like everything is being taken away, the natural human tendency is to focus with laser intensity on the deficit, on what's missing or broken. The Stoics proposed a radical shift in focus. They taught that by consciously directing our attention to what remains, to the gifts that are still present even in the bleakest of circumstances, we build a psychological shield against despair and anchor ourselves in a reality that is often far more nuanced than our fear allows us to see. This practice doesn't erase the hardship, but it prevents the hardship from erasing everything else. Seneca, who faced exile, chronic illness, and ultimately a death sentence from his former student Nero, wrote extensively about gratitude as a form of practical armor for the soul. In one of his letters to Lucilius, he makes a stunningly simple yet profound observation. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. He argued that our suffering is frequently amplified by our ingratitude, by our focus on what we lack rather than our appreciation for what we have. He didn't suggest we should be grateful for the hardship itself, but rather that we should practice gratitude in spite of it, finding the good that persists alongside the bad. He advised, let us appreciate the value of what we have and not forget its worth because we are so familiar with it. For a leader watching their society crumble, this mindset is transformative. It shifts the narrative from one of total loss to one of enduring value, allowing them to identify and mobilize the resources that still exist: the loyalty of their team, their own capacity for reason, the support of their community, and use them as a foundation for rebuilding. History offers powerful examples of leaders who used this Stoic practice to sustain not only their own morale, but the spirit of those around them during profound collapses. Consider the plight of Captain Ernest Shackleton and his crew after their ship, the Endurance, was crushed by Antarctic ice in 1915. Stranded on the ice for months, facing starvation, freezing temperatures, and the constant threat of death, it would have been easy to succumb to collective despair. Shackleton's leadership genius was partly his ability to cultivate a culture of gratitude for small mercies. He made sure to celebrate a successful hunt for seals, a break in the weather, or the simple fact that they were all still alive together. This relentless focus on what they did have, their camaraderie, their skills, their dwindling but present supplies rather than what they had lost, was a critical factor in maintaining the group's will to survive and their eventual miraculous rescue. His gratitude wasn't naive, it was strategic, a deliberate bulwark against the overwhelming negativity that could have doomed them all. This practice is far more than a simple feel-good exercise. It is a rigorous cognitive discipline. It forces the mind to break out of its well-worn neural pathways of lack and complaint and to search for evidence of sufficiency and benefit. In doing so, it corrects a natural cognitive bias toward negativity. Our brains are wired to spot threat and deficiency because that's what kept our ancestors alive. Gratitude is the conscious override of that ancient wiring. It is the act of saying, I see the threat, but I choose to also see the sanctuary. I acknowledge the loss, but I refuse to let it blind me to the gifts that remain. This doesn't happen automatically. It requires practice. Just as a musician practices scales daily to be able to play a complex symphony under pressure, we must practice gratitude daily to be able to access it during a crisis. So I extend a challenge to you right here and now. Whatever today has held for you, whatever challenges you are facing, pause for just 60 seconds. Push aside the mental list of everything that's wrong or difficult or worrying, and instead bring to mind 3 specific things you are genuinely grateful for in this exact moment. They don't have to be grand. In fact, it's often the smallest, most ordinary things that hold the most power. The warmth of a mug in your hands, the sound of rain against the window, a message from a friend, the simple fact that you can take a deep breath. Write them down if you can. Feel the shift in your physiology as you do this, the slight relaxation in your shoulders, the calming of your breath. This is not about ignoring your problems. It is about fortifying your spirit so that you can face them with a clearer mind and a steadier heart, just as the Stoics intended. True courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. This is a critical distinction that separates Stoic composure from mere passivity. The Stoics never envisioned their philosophy as a retreat from the world into a shell of quiet contemplation. Rather, they saw it as the essential mental preparation for right action, especially when that action is difficult, frightening, or comes with great personal risk. The inner calm they cultivated was not an end in itself, but the stable platform from which courageous, virtuous action could be launched. It's the difference between a placid lake, which is simply still, and a deeply anchored ship, which remains steady even as it powers through a storm. The stillness is not for its own beauty, but for its utility in enabling forward motion. Seneca, in his writing, draws a powerful line between true courage and the mere appearance of it. He warns against reckless bravado, which is often just fear in disguise, a desperate lashing out to assert control. True courage, for Seneca, is a rational virtue. It is the calculated choice to face danger because reason dictates it is the right thing to do, not because an emotion like anger or pride is driving you. He writes, "The wise man will not fear danger, but he will avoid it. He will be careful, but not fearful." This is the Stoic ideal, a clear-eyed assessment of the risks, an acceptance of those risks as potentially necessary for a greater good, and then a calm, deliberate decision to act. The action itself is courageous, but the mental state from which it springs is one of composure. The fear is acknowledged, perhaps even felt physically, but it is not allowed to hijack the rational mind or paralyze the will. We see this principle perfected in the life of Cato the Younger, whom we've discussed before, but whose actions bear revisiting through this specific lens. When Julius Caesar marched on Rome, effectively ending the Republic, Cato faced a choice that was drenched in fear. To oppose Caesar meant almost certain death and the destruction of everything he owned. To submit meant personal safety, but the death of the ideals he had sworn to uphold. His courage was not shown in a single, fiery outburst, but in a long, grinding campaign of resistance that required immense daily fortitude. He organized defenses, gave speeches knowing they might be his last, and ultimately chose to take his own life rather than live under a tyranny. What is most stoic about his courage is that it was devoid of theatrics. It was quiet, resolute, and consistent. His inner calm, his acceptance of his fate, was what enabled his bold, uncompromising action until his very last breath. He moved forward with fear nipping at his heels every step of the way. This same fusion of calm and courage is visible in modern leaders who have faced existential crises. Consider the actions of airline captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger in those 3 minutes and 28 seconds after his Airbus A320 struck a flock of geese, losing all engine power over New York City. The cockpit recordings reveal no panic, no raised voices, no emotional outbursts, only a series of incredibly calm, succinct, and deliberate communications and actions. He was undoubtedly afraid, any human would be, but his training and temperament allowed him to compartmentalize that fear. His composure created the cognitive space to run through his options, quickly conclude that returning to any airport was impossible, and make the courageous decision to ditch the aircraft in the Hudson River. His courageous action attempting a maneuver that had never been successfully performed with a commercial airliner was directly enabled by his profound inner calm. He moved forward with the fear, using it perhaps to sharpen his focus, but never allowing it to take the controls. So how do we translate this into our own lives, where the stakes are lower but the fears feel just as real? Stoic courage is not about waiting for a life or death moment. It's about the daily practice of choosing the right action over the comfortable inaction. It's the courage to have that difficult conversation you've been avoiding, to launch that project you're afraid might fail, to set a boundary with someone who takes you for granted, or to admit a mistake and apologize. The fear in these situations is real: fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of looking foolish. But the Stoic response is to acknowledge that fear, accept it as a natural part of the process, and then deliberately act in accordance with what you know to be right and virtuous. I want you to bring to mind one action you know you need to take, but that fear has held you back from pursuing. It doesn't have to be monumental. Now, apply the Stoic framework. First, separate the external outcome, how the other person might react, whether you will succeed, from the internal action, which is entirely within your control, your effort, your integrity, your courage. Then plan not just the action, but your mindset. How will you prepare yourself to feel the fear without being ruled by it? Perhaps you'll take a few deep breaths beforehand, or recite a Stoic mantra like, "This is within my power to do, the outcome is not." By planning your response to the fear itself, you are not trying to eliminate it. You are building the composure necessary to act alongside it, to move forward despite its presence. and in doing so, you unlock a deeper, more resilient form of courage. How much of what you currently want in your life is something you truly need? This provocative question strikes at the heart of the 17th Stoic principle, a profound and practical strategy for reducing anxiety by consciously simplifying our desires and refocusing on our essential needs. The Stoics observed that a significant portion of our mental turmoil doesn't come from a lack of possessions or status, but from an endless expansion of what we believe is required for our happiness. They proposed a radical solution. Instead of working tirelessly to acquire more, we could find immediate peace by systematically wanting less. This isn't about adopting a life of poverty or self-denial for its own sake. It's about conducting a rigorous audit of our desires to distinguish between what is natural and necessary for our well-being and what is artificial, vain, and perpetually out of reach. By drawing this critical distinction, we can free up immense mental energy previously wasted on chasing phantoms and redirect it toward living a life of genuine contentment and purpose. Epictetus, who began his life with nothing as a slave, became one of the clearest voices on this subject. In his core teachings, compiled in the Enchiridion, he draws a powerful line between things that are within our control and things that are not, and he closely ties this to the nature of our desires. He argues that freedom is not the ability to get everything you want, but the wisdom to want only what you can reliably have, which is to say, the development of your own character and virtue. He famously said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." For Epictetus, a want was a leash that tied our inner peace to an external object, making us vulnerable to fortune's whims. A natural desire, like the need for food, water, and shelter, is limited and can be satisfied. A vain desire, like the craving for public acclaim, limitless wealth, or the latest luxury, is a bottomless pit. The more we pour into it, the more it demands, ensuring we remain in a permanent state of anxiety and lack. His teaching is an invitation to sever those leashes, to find our security not in the volatility of the external world, but in the self-sufficient fortress of a mind that has consciously chosen to be satisfied with enough. This philosophy of sufficiency over surplus has been a guiding light for leaders navigating periods of extreme scarcity and social upheaval. Consider the example of Marcus Aurelius himself, the most powerful man in the known world. Despite his absolute authority and access to unimaginable wealth, his personal journals reveal a man deeply committed to living simply. He slept on a simple camp bed, wore ordinary clothing, and ate common food. He didn't do this as a public performance, but as a private discipline to ensure his focus remained on his duty to Rome and his own moral development, not on the pampering of his body or the accumulation of luxuries. By minimizing his desires for external comforts, he immunized himself against the corruption and distraction that so often accompanies absolute power. His composure during the Antonine Plague and constant warfare was fueled in part by this simplicity. Because he had so little to lose in a personal sense, he had less to fear, allowing him to lead from a place of rational clarity rather than panicked self-preservation. This principle extends far beyond ancient history and into modern examples of resilient leadership. During the Great Depression, a period of profound economic and social collapse, many leaders who maintained a public posture of austerity and shared sacrifice were able to foster a sense of collective solidarity and calm. By visibly simplifying their own lives and desires, they demonstrated that the core of human dignity and strength was not tied to material abundance. This alignment between their message and their personal practice built trust and morale, showing people that they could endure and even find meaning in hardship by focusing on essential needs like community, mutual support, and simple, honest work. Their composure was contagious because it was rooted in a believable and attainable reality, not a distant dream of restored luxury. The practice of simplifying desires is ultimately about reclaiming your attention, which is your most precious mental resource. Every time we latch onto a new want, a newer car, a bigger title, a more exotic vacation, we hand over a piece of our focus to something outside ourselves. We start constantly scanning the environment for opportunities to acquire it, comparing ourselves to others who have it, and feeling a lingering sense of dissatisfaction until we get it. This mental chatter is the very engine of anxiety. The Stoic alternative is to perform a simple but powerful mental exercise. Take a sheet of paper and draw a line down the center. On one side, list your natural needs: nourishment, shelter, basic clothing, meaningful connection, the ability to contribute. On the other side, list your vain desires: the Instagram perfect home, the designer label, the status symbol, the endless stream of entertainment. Merely seeing this distinction written down can be startlingly clarifying. It reveals how much of our mental bandwidth is consumed by the column on the right, chasing things that, even if acquired, will never truly satisfy the hunger for meaning and security that can only be found within. So I want to offer you a direct and personal challenge, one that Epictetus would have approved of. Identify one specific desire from that second column, one thing you currently want but do not genuinely need. It doesn't have to be a grand thing. It could be as simple as the desire for a newer smartphone when your current one works perfectly, or the desire to constantly check for likes on a social media post, or the desire for a more prestigious job title without a change in your actual impact. Now make a conscious decision to practice letting go of that specific desire for just 1 week. Don't act on it. Don't fantasize about it. When the thought arises, gently acknowledge it as a vain desire and redirect your attention to something from the first column. Perhaps preparing a simple, healthy meal or having a genuine conversation with someone you care about. Pay close attention to what happens to your mental state. You will likely find that the absence of that wanting creates a quiet space, a sense of lightness and clarity you didn't realize was missing. This is the practical freedom the Stoics promised: not a life of having everything, but a life of needing very little, and in that needlessness, discovering a composure that no external collapse can ever disturb. Where are you right now, not physically, but mentally? Are you replaying a difficult conversation from yesterday, or anxiously rehearsing a meeting that's still days away? This scattering of our attention is one of the greatest thieves of composure, and the Stoics offered a powerful antidote with their 18th principle, the practice of mindful presence. They understood that a mind divided between past regrets and future anxieties is a mind weakened, unable to respond with its full capacity to the demands of the present moment. Marcus Aurelius, amidst the endless pressures of empire, constantly called himself back to this singular focus. In his meditations, he writes, "Give yourself a gift, the present moment." He wasn't speaking of leisure or luxury, but of the profound gift of undivided attention. He advised himself to approach each task, no matter how small or large, as if it were the only thing that existed, to pour himself into it completely without the distraction of what came before or what might come after. For him, this was not a spiritual abstraction but a practical strategy for effective leadership and inner peace. The Stoic approach to presence is deeply practical. It's about recognizing that the past is immutable and the future is uncertain. The only reality we can ever actually influence is the one unfolding right now. In another passage, Marcus reflects, "Don't let your imagination be crushed by life as a whole. Stick with the situation at hand." He's advising against the common habit of allowing a single challenge to balloon in our minds until it feels like our entire life is collapsing. By narrowing our focus to the immediate task, drafting the next sentence, listening to the person in front of us, solving the single problem on the desk, we prevent overwhelm and access a deeper reserve of clarity and capability. This mindful presence is the mental equivalent of a sharpened blade. It cuts through the noise and complexity of a situation with precision and efficiency, whereas a distracted mind is like a dull tool, requiring more effort and yielding poorer results. We can observe this principle in action in the conduct of leaders who have thrived under immense pressure. Consider a surgeon performing a complex life or decision procedure. The stakes could not be higher, and the potential for distraction is vast. Thoughts of a previous patient, concerns about hospital administration, or anxiety over the outcome. Yet, their training cultivates a radical form of stoic presence. Their entire world narrows to the field of view in the operating microscope, the feel of the instrument in their hand, and the vital signs on the monitor. This intense, singular focus is not a denial of the larger context, but the only way to navigate it successfully. Their composure under pressure is a direct result of their ability to fully inhabit the present moment, executing each precise, necessary action without being flooded by the emotional weight of the situation's gravity. This practice is just as critical, though perhaps less dramatic, in our own daily lives. The modern world is engineered to fragment our attention with constant notifications, multitasking demands, and an endless stream of information vying for our focus. The result is often a feeling of being busy yet ineffective, constantly in motion but never truly engaged. The Stoic remedy is to intentionally reclaim your attention, to act as the gatekeeper of your own mind. It means that when you are working, you work. When you are speaking with a loved one, you truly listen, setting aside the phone and the mental to-do list. When you are eating, you taste the food. This is the discipline of presence, a conscious, moment-by-moment effort to anchor yourself in your current activity, gently guiding your focus back each time it wanders into the past or future. I encourage you to make this principle tangible today with a simple experiment. Choose one routine activity you will perform with your full, undivided attention for just 5 minutes. It could be drinking your morning coffee, taking a walk, or even washing the dishes. For those 5 minutes, let that be your entire world. When your mind inevitably drifts to a worry or a plan, acknowledge the thought without judgment and gently return your focus to the sensations of the moment, the warmth of the mug, the rhythm of your footsteps, the feel of the water. This isn't about achieving a state of perfect zen. It's about training the muscle of your attention. Each time you bring it back, you are strengthening your ability to choose where your mind resides, building the foundational composure needed to meet any challenge, not with a scattered and anxious spirit, but with a calm and present mind. Ever dealt with someone who seemed absolutely determined to make your life harder? That colleague who constantly undermines your ideas, the family member who knows exactly which buttons to push, or the stranger whose sheer incompetence derails your entire day. Our instinctive reaction is often frustration, anger, or a desire to set them straight, to show them exactly how wrong they are. But the Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, proposed a radically different and far more effective response. He recognized that dealing with difficult people is not an occasional nuisance. It's an inevitable and frequent test of our composure, and how we handle it determines not only our peace of mind but often the success of our endeavors. His solution wasn't to defeat these people, but to understand them, and in doing so, to disarm their power to disturb our inner calm. In his private journal, Marcus Aurelius consistently returns to a single, liberating idea: that people who act badly are not evil but misguided. They are acting from a place of ignorance about what is truly good. He writes, "When people injure you, ask yourself what good or harm they thought would come of it." If you understand that, you'll feel sympathy rather than outrage or anger. This is a profound reframing. He's not asking us to excuse harmful behavior, but to see it for what it is, an error in judgment, a symptom of a mistaken belief about how to achieve happiness or security. The person who lashes out in anger likely believes it will bring them respect or relieve their pain. The one who acts out of greed believes possessions will finally make them secure. They are, in a sense, spiritually unwell, and our anger toward them is as irrational as being angry at a sick person for coughing. This perspective doesn't demand that we become doormats. It empowers us to choose a response based on reason and compassion rather than being hijacked by a reactive emotion. Marcus offers several practical mental exercises to cultivate this patience. In one passage, he reminds himself, "It is a royal thing to do good and be spoken of badly." This shifts the focus from the other person's actions back to our own, which is the only thing we can control. Our virtue remains intact and even shines brighter when it is not dimmed by a need for external validation or a desire for revenge. In another reflection, he advises himself to think of the offending person's entire life, their upbringing, their fears, their desires, to see them as a complex human being shaped by forces they may not understand, rather than reducing them to a simple villain in our personal story. This wider lens fosters empathy and makes it easier to respond with a calm, measured approach designed to de-escalate the situation rather than inflame it. We can see the immense strategic value of this principle in leaders who successfully navigated periods of immense internal division and collapse. Consider the task faced by the framers of the United States Constitution. The delegates to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 were a fractious group with wildly different interests, representing states that often saw each other as rivals. Tempers flared, debates grew heated, and the entire project was on the verge of collapse multiple times. Leaders like James Madison and George Washington didn't respond by condemning the difficult delegates as obstinate or foolish. Instead, they practiced a form of Stoic compassion. They sought to understand the underlying fears and legitimate concerns of each faction: the small state's fear of being dominated, the southern state's economic anxieties. By patiently listening and acknowledging these flaws in the system and in each other, they were able to craft compromises like the bicameral legislature and the 3/5 compromise that were imperfect but ultimately held the fragile union together. Their composure in the face of others' stubbornness and error was not a weakness. It was the essential glue that allowed a new nation to be born from conflict. This approach transforms our interactions from battles to be won into opportunities for understanding. The next time you find yourself frustrated by someone's behavior, try applying the Marcus Aurelius filter. Instead of asking, "How can I make them stop?" or "Why are they so difficult?" ask yourself, what false belief might be driving this action? What good do they incorrectly think this will achieve? This momentary pause engages your rational mind and creates a space between the stimulus and your response. Perhaps the micromanaging boss is acting from a deep-seated fear of failure, not a desire to control you. Perhaps the dismissive friend is protecting themselves from a vulnerability they can't articulate. Seeing this doesn't mean you accept poor treatment. It means you can address the root cause with more clarity and far less emotional turmoil on your part. Bring to mind one specific person in your life who consistently challenges your patience. It might be a relative with opposing political views, a co-worker who dismisses your contributions, or even a stranger whose driving habits infuriate you. Now, for just a moment, try to see them through the Stoic lens of compassionate understanding. What ignorance might be guiding them? What unmet need or unexamined fear could be behind their behavior? How does shifting your view from "they are a bad person" to "they are a mistaken person" change your emotional reaction? This exercise isn't about granting them absolution. It's about granting yourself freedom, the freedom to respond with purposeful composure instead of reactive anger, and to navigate the inevitable flaws of others without letting them create flaws in your own character. How well do you truly know yourself, not in moments of calm reflection, but when the pressure is mounting, deadlines are looming, and your emotions are starting to flare? This is the ultimate test of self-awareness, and the Stoics placed it at the very foundation of composure. They understood that we cannot hope to master our reactions to the external world if we remain a stranger to the internal landscape from which those reactions spring. True resilience isn't about building a higher wall against outside chaos. It's about first mapping the hidden fault lines within your own character, the unconscious biases, the unexamined triggers, and the fragile pride that pressure can so easily exploit. Composure under fire, therefore, doesn't begin with a breathing technique in the moment of crisis. It begins with the often uncomfortable, always courageous work of honest self-assessment long before the first spark flies. Seneca, the wealthy advisor who navigated the treacherous court of Nero, was a relentless advocate for this kind of radical self-honesty. In his moral letters to Lucilius, he treats self-deception as the primary enemy of a good life. He writes, "What progress have I made? I am beginning to be my own friend." That is a startling statement. For Seneca, being your own friend didn't mean indulging your every whim or excusing your faults. It meant knowing yourself with such clear-eyed compassion that you could no longer be surprised or sabotaged by your own weaknesses. He prescribed a daily practice of introspection, a philosophical accounting of the soul where you would scrutinize your day not for accomplishments, but for character. He asked, "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, I examine my entire day and go back over what I have done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by." This nightly audit wasn't meant to breed guilt but to foster responsibility. It was the process of catching your small hypocrisies, your petty jealousies, and your moments of cowardice before they could compound into life-altering mistakes. We can see the life-saving value of this principle in the conduct of historical leaders who managed to avoid catastrophic errors of judgment. Consider the example of George C. Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff during World War II. Marshall was renowned for his preternatural calm and strategic brilliance, but those qualities were underpinned by a profound self-awareness. He knew his own temperament, that he could be aloof and impatient, and he consciously structured his leadership team to compensate for these flaws. He surrounded himself with assertive, strong-willed generals like Eisenhower and Patton, not yes men, because he understood that his own blind spots required the corrective lens of other perspectives. He also famously recused himself from the decision to lead the D-Day invasion, recommending Eisenhower instead, a move that required the self-awareness to know that his skills were best utilized in Washington as a strategist and administrator, not in the field as a combat commander. This humility, born of self-knowledge, was a strategic asset that helped win a war. Self-awareness for the Stoics is the ultimate defensive strategy. It allows you to identify your personal vulnerabilities before an adversary can exploit them. If you know you have a quick temper, you can institute a personal rule to never send an email when angry. If you know you are susceptible to flattery, you can learn to question the motives of those who praise you excessively. If you know you tend toward procrastination when faced with a large task, you can break it down into tiny, immediate steps. This isn't about eliminating your flaws overnight. That's often impossible. It's about managing them so effectively that they cease to control your life and erode your composure. You stop being ambushed by your own character and start working with it, using your strengths strategically and building guardrails around your weaknesses. This practice demands more than just fleeting self-reflection. It requires a structured approach. The Stoic tool of choice was journaling, not as a diary of events, but as a ledger of character. I encourage you to take Seneca's advice and try this for yourself. Tonight, before you sleep, put aside just 5 minutes. Take a notebook and ask yourself one simple but powerful question. What is one blind spot I suspect I might have? Maybe it's a tendency to dismiss ideas that aren't your own, or a deep-seated need for approval that makes you hesitant to make unpopular decisions, or a pride that prevents you from admitting when you're wrong. Don't just answer superficially. Sit with the question, then trace that thread. How has this unseen aspect of yourself influenced your actions this week? Did it cause you to miss an important piece of feedback? Did it make you overcommit to a failing project because you couldn't face the embarrassment of pulling out? This act of writing it down, of giving the blind spot a name and a history, is the first and most critical step toward bringing it into the light where you can finally begin to manage it, transforming a hidden vulnerability into a known quantity and reclaiming the composure that comes with truly knowing who you are. What if joy wasn't something you found out in the world, but something you built from the ground up through your own actions and choices? This is the radical and liberating claim at the heart of the 21st Stoic principle, which redefines happiness not as a fleeting emotion dependent on fortune, but as a sturdy, resilient state of being that arises directly from living a life of virtue. The Stoics drew a critical distinction between pleasure and joy. Pleasure is a superficial, temporary sensation triggered by external events. The taste of good food, the thrill of a compliment, the excitement of a purchase. But joy, in the Stoic sense, is something far deeper and more durable. They called it eudaimonia, a Greek word often translated as flourishing or the good life, and they argued that this profound satisfaction could only be the natural byproduct of moral excellence. It is the quiet, steady contentment that comes from knowing, in your core, that you have acted with courage, justice, wisdom, and self-discipline, regardless of whether the external outcome was a triumph or a failure. This makes joy utterly invulnerable to the whims of fate, because its source is not outside of you, but within your own will and character. Epictetus, who knew more than most about the instability of external fortune, anchored his entire philosophy on this internal source of satisfaction. In his discourses, he makes it brutally clear: if your happiness is tied to anything outside your control, your wealth, your health, your reputation, you have handed the keys to your emotional well-being over to a world that is inherently chaotic and unreliable. He taught that the only reliable good is a virtuous character, and the only reliable evil is a vicious one. Therefore, he argued, your satisfaction must be sought in the one place you have absolute sovereignty, your own choices. He writes, he is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. The things he has, in this Stoic sense, are not possessions but virtues. The joy comes from the act of being honest when you could lie, from being courageous when you are afraid, from being just when it would be easier to be selfish. The feeling of integrity that follows such an action is, for the Stoic, the highest form of happiness available to a human being, and it is a happiness that no external circumstance can ever take away. History offers powerful examples of individuals who embodied this principle. finding a profound sense of peace not in spite of their circumstances, but because of their unwavering commitment to their values. Consider the countless political dissidents and prisoners of conscience throughout history who have endured imprisonment, torture, and isolation. From a conventional perspective, they had every reason to be miserable, stripped of their freedom, their comforts, and their futures. Yet many, like the Soviet dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn or the South African anti-apartheid activist Nelson Mandela, have written about finding a strange and unshakable sense of purpose and even contentment in their ordeal. Their joy did not come from their suffering, but from the knowledge that they were suffering for something they believed was right and true. Their cells became the ultimate testing ground for their virtue, and every day they resisted despair or bitterness was a day they built their joy through the action of holding fast to their integrity. Their external world was a nightmare, but their internal world, the domain of their character, remained a citadel of meaning. This philosophy turns the conventional pursuit of happiness on its head. We are conditioned to believe that if we just achieve the right goal, acquire the right object, or receive the right recognition, then we will finally be happy. The Stoic argues that this is backward. Lasting joy is not the reward you receive at the end of virtuous action. It is the experience you have while performing the virtuous action. It is the feeling of flow and alignment when you are fully engaged in doing what you know to be right. This means that the opportunity for joy is available in every single moment of every single day, because in every moment we are faced with choices, however small, about how to act. You can find joy in the simple act of patiently listening to a child, because that is an exercise in kindness. You can find it in choosing to do a difficult task well, because that is an exercise in excellence. You can find it in admitting a mistake, because that is an exercise in honesty. The building blocks of a joyful life are these countless small acts of virtue, not the occasional large trophy from the world. Take a moment to reflect on your own experience. Can you recall a time when you did something because it was the right thing to do, even though it was difficult, and even though the external outcome was uncertain or even negative? Perhaps you stood up for a colleague who was being treated unfairly, even though it risked your own social standing. Maybe you told a difficult truth that you knew would be poorly received. Or perhaps you simply chose to be kind to someone who was being rude, refusing to mirror their negativity. In that moment, after the action was complete, what did you feel? There might have been anxiety about the consequences, but underneath that, was there not also a deep, quiet sense of calm and self-respect? That feeling is the joy that comes from virtue alone. It is the internal confirmation that you are living in alignment with your highest principles. It requires no audience, no trophy, and no applause. It is yours and yours alone, and it is the most reliable foundation for a life of genuine composure, because it is built on the one thing in this universe that you can truly control, the quality of your own character. Composure isn't about waiting out the storm, it's about steering the ship. This critical distinction forms the heart of the 22nd Stoic principle, the discipline of action. It shatters the common misconception that Stoicism is a philosophy of passive resignation, of simply enduring hardship with a stiff upper lip. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Stoics saw inner calm not as an end in itself, but as the essential foundation for clear, decisive, and virtuous action in the world. Composure is the stable deck from which you can accurately aim your cannons. It's the steady hand that allows you to suture the wound or build the new structure amidst the chaos. This principle demands that we channel our cultivated peace into purposeful engagement, transforming our reasoned judgments into tangible impacts that benefit both ourselves and our communities. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, is the ultimate embodiment of this fusion of serene acceptance and vigorous action. His personal journals, which we know as meditations, are filled with reminders to not just think rightly, but to act rightly. He constantly urged himself to align his actions with nature and his duty, writing, "Don't go on discussing what a good person should be, just be one." In another passage, he advises himself to stop talking about the qualities of a virtuous soul and instead to be one, full and entire. For Marcus, the entire purpose of his philosophical introspection was to prepare his mind for the immense responsibilities of leading an empire through plague and war. His composure allowed him to process the terrifying reports from the front lines without panic. But that calm was worthless if it didn't then translate into the decisive orders to mobilize troops, organize supply lines, and care for the sick. His inner citadel was not a place to hide from the world. It was a command center from which to serve it. This disciplined approach to action is deeply woven into the fabric of Stoic thought. The philosophy provides a clear framework to ensure our actions are both effective and virtuous. First, our actions must be guided by reason, not by raw, unchecked emotion. This is the core of the discipline of assent applied to our behavior. Before acting, we pause to ask, is this impulse coming from a place of fear, anger, or vanity, or is it coming from a rational assessment of what the situation truly requires? Second, our actions must be directed toward things within our sphere of influence. We focus our efforts on what we can actually change, avoiding the wasted energy of tilting at windmills. And third, our actions must be aimed at the common good. The Stoic view of the world is deeply interconnected. To act virtuously is to act in a way that benefits the larger human community, the hive to which we all belong. We can see this principle enacted by leaders throughout history who managed to implement significant, necessary reforms during periods of intense crisis without succumbing to the pressure. Consider the leadership of Abraham Lincoln during the American Civil War, a period of near total national collapse. Lincoln faced immense political opposition, personal vilification, and the staggering human cost of the war itself. He was known for a certain melancholic calm, a composure that allowed him to absorb the blows of fortune without being broken by them, but he was far from passive. That inner steadiness was what enabled him to take profoundly courageous and decisive action, drafting the Emancipation Proclamation, a move that transformed the moral character of the war, and tirelessly working to pass the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. His actions were purposeful, reasoned, and directed toward his ultimate duty of preserving the Union and extending liberty. His composure didn't lead to inaction. It made his actions more strategic, more resilient, and ultimately more impactful. This disciplined approach transforms how we view our own agency in the face of personal challenges. A passive endurance of a difficult job might mean quietly suffering through a toxic environment while complaining to friends. The Stoic discipline of action would involve a clear-eyed assessment. What is within my control here? Perhaps it's not the entire company culture, but it might be setting a boundary with a difficult colleague, or having a respectful conversation with a manager about a specific issue, or even updating a resume and beginning a planned search for a new role. The action is not a reactive explosion of frustration, but a purposeful, virtue-guided step taken from a place of inner calm. The composure is what allows you to choose the right action instead of the easiest or most emotional one. Now bring this principle into your own life for a moment. Identify one area where you have been practicing a form of passive endurance, where you have been waiting for a storm to pass rather than taking the helm. Perhaps it's a health goal you've put off, a creative project you've delayed starting because you fear it won't be perfect, or a conflict in a relationship you've avoided addressing. The Stoic invitation is to move from endurance to engagement. Plan one single, virtuous action step you can take this week. Make it specific, manageable, and entirely within your control. Your action isn't about guaranteeing a specific outcome that's an external. It's about honoring your own capacity for agency. It's about proving to yourself that your composure is a tool for navigation, not a shelter for hiding. What is one thing you can do? Have you ever felt so overpowered by anger or fear that your thoughts seemed to vanish, replaced by a roaring static that made clear thinking impossible? That moment when emotion doesn't just influence your decisions but completely hijacks them is a universal human experience, and it's precisely the mental state the Stoics sought to master through their 23rd principle, the practice of balancing emotion with reason. They didn't advocate for the elimination of feeling that would be both impossible and inhuman. Instead, they proposed a more sophisticated and empowering model: to treat our emotions not as absolute commanders that must be obeyed, but as intense, raw data streams that must be processed and evaluated by Chinese letter, discerning faculty of reason before any action is taken. This is the difference between being a passenger on a runaway emotional train and being the engineer who can regulate its speed and direction, even when the tracks are shaking. Seneca, in his profound essay on anger, provides what might be the most practical guidebook ever written on this subject. He uses a powerful analogy, describing anger not as a sudden explosion but as a process that begins with a first spark, an initial impression of being wrong. This spark can either be stamped out immediately by reason, or it can be fanned into a flame by our assent, our agreement with the initial, often distorted, interpretation of the event. He writes, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." This single piece of advice is a masterstroke of psychological insight. He isn't saying to suppress the feeling. He's instructing us to impose a mandatory pause between the emotional trigger and our response. In that space, reason gets a chance to enter the conversation. We can ask Seneca's questions: is this injury real or perceived? Was the intent malicious or accidental? Is my response proportionate to the offense? By subjecting our emotional impulses to this rational cross-examination, we prevent them from becoming full-blown conflagrations that consume our judgment and lead to actions we deeply regret. We can witness the life or death importance of this principle in the actions of leaders navigating unimaginable pressure. Consider the decision-making process of a nuclear submarine captain during a potential crisis. Sensors might indicate an incoming threat, a scenario designed to trigger the most primal human emotion, terror. The immediate emotional impulse would be to launch a counterstrike, to retaliate from a place of survival fear. But the captain's training is a direct application of Stoic reasoning. They are taught to treat that initial surge of fear as data, a signal that something is wrong but not as a command. They must then run that data through a rigid, rational protocol, verifying the sensor readings, checking for system malfunctions, confirming with other officers, and weighing the catastrophic consequences of a mistake. Their composure, their ability to let reason moderate that raw emotional impulse, is the only thing standing between peace and global disaster. Their calm is not the absence of fear, it is the mastery of it. This practice transforms our relationship with our own inner world. An emotion like anger is recast from a monster to be feared into a messenger, albeit a very loud and dramatic one, trying to point out a perceived injustice. Anxiety becomes a signal that we are facing uncertainty and need to prepare, not a reason to paralyze ourselves. Even grief, while never to be dismissed, can be met with reason that reminds us of the beauty of what was lost and the importance of cherishing the connections we still have. The goal is integration, not suppression. We acknowledge the emotion, we thank it for its input, and then we bring in the CEO of the mind, our rational faculty, to make the final executive decision on how to proceed. This is how we prevent the natural and human experience of emotion from escalating into the destructive force of overwhelming passion. Now, bring this into your own life. Cast your mind back to a recent moment where you felt a powerful emotional surge, a flash of rage in traffic, a wave of anxiety before a presentation, a spike of jealousy in a relationship. Replay that moment, but this time insert Seneca's pause. Imagine yourself in that situation, feeling that same intensity, but instead of immediately reacting, you take a single, deep breath and create a sliver of space. In that space, ask the rational questions. What is this emotion telling me? What is the actual facts of the situation, separate from my story about it? What would a calm, measured response look like? This simple act of mental time travel isn't about regretting the past. It's about building the neural pathways for a different future. It's training your mind to default to this integrated approach, where emotion informs but reason decides, granting you the profound composure to navigate any chaos with a clear head and a steady hand. You are a tiny part of a vast cosmos. How does that shift your perspective on the argument you had this morning, the criticism you received at work, or the urgent need you feel to prove yourself right? This radical shift in scale is the essence of the 24th Stoic principle, the profound practice of humility. For the Stoics, humility was not about self-deprecation or thinking less of yourself. It was about thinking of yourself less and within a much larger context. It is the conscious, sober recognition of your true scale within the grand scheme of existence, a perspective that instantly deflates the hot air of ego, pride, and self-importance that so often leads to poor decisions, damaged relationships, and unnecessary suffering. This cosmic humility is not a call to insignificance, but an invitation to find a more authentic and grounded significance by understanding your proper place in the order of things. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man on earth, constantly used this perspective as an anchor to prevent the intoxication of absolute authority from corrupting his judgment. In the private pages of his journal, he engaged in a relentless dialogue with himself to ward off the arrogance that his position could so easily foster. He writes, "Think of the universal substance, of which you have a very small portion, and of universal time, of which a short and indivisible interval has been assigned to you, and of that which is fixed by destiny, and how small a part of it you are." He wasn't trying to make himself feel small in a negative way. He was conducting a reality check by mentally zooming out to the scale of the cosmos and the sweep of millennia. His immediate concerns, the political scheming of a rival senator, the temptation to seek glory in a military campaign, the sting of a personal insult shrank to their proper size. This practice allowed him to approach his duties not as a god-king, but as a mortal man with a specific, temporary role to play in the vast and ancient tapestry of Rome. His humility was the source of his strength, keeping him focused on service rather than self-aggrandizement. This Stoic insight into the folly of pride is a recurring theme in meditations. Marcus reflects on the countless individuals who once strutted across the stage of history, filled with their own importance, now long forgotten and returned to dust. He observes Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. This isn't a morbid thought, it's a liberating one. It cuts through the artificial hierarchies we construct and reminds us of our shared, fundamental humanity and mortality. The pride we feel over our title, our accomplishments, or our possessions is, from this cosmic viewpoint, a comical illusion. The CEO and the intern, the famous artist and the unknown custodian will all share the same fate. this realization doesn't devalue our work, it revalues it. It encourages us to find meaning not in the external trappings of success that fortune can give and take away, but in the internal quality of our character and the integrity of our actions, which are ours to keep forever. We can see the practical, strategic value of this humility in leaders who manage to avoid the downfall that so often accompanies unchecked power and pride. Consider the example of George Washington after the American Revolutionary War. At the height of his popularity, with an army that would have gladly made him a king or a permanent dictator, he displayed profound Stoic humility. He appeared before the Continental Congress and voluntarily resigned his military commission, handing authority back to the civilian government. This breathtaking act of relinquishing power was rooted in a deep understanding that he was a servant of the new republic, not its master. His humility wasn't weakness, it was a stunning display of strength and wisdom that cemented his legacy and set a crucial precedent for American democracy. He avoided the trap of ego that has ensnared countless victorious generals throughout history because he saw himself as a part of a larger project, a single chapter in a much longer story. This practice is incredibly relevant in our daily interactions, where the ego so often trips us up. How many arguments are prolonged simply because we cannot bear to admit we were wrong? How many opportunities for collaboration are lost because we are unwilling to acknowledge that someone else might have a better idea? How much anxiety is generated by our desperate need to be seen as competent, intelligent, or important? Stoic humility acts as an antidote to all of this. It gives us the permission to be imperfect, to be learners, to be works in progress. It allows us to listen to critical feedback not as a personal attack, but as valuable data that can help us improve. It enables us to celebrate the successes of others without feeling threatened, because our sense of worth is no longer tied to being the best in the room. So I invite you to bring this cosmic perspective down to earth for a moment. Reflect on one specific area of your life where your pride or ego might currently be clouding your judgment. Perhaps it's in an ongoing conflict where you're refusing to see the other side, a professional setting where you dismiss ideas that aren't your own, or a personal goal that's driven more by a desire for status than for genuine fulfillment. Now mentally zoom out. View this situation from the vantage point of 100 years from now. How important will this disagreement truly be? How much will that title or that possession really matter? From that expanded viewpoint, what might a more humble, grounded approach look like? Perhaps it involves asking for help, admitting a mistake, or simply listening with the genuine goal of understanding, rather than just waiting for your turn to talk. Embracing your small place in the vast cosmos isn't about diminishing your life. It's about enlarging your perspective to live it with more grace, less friction, and a deeper, more enduring composure. The best time to prepare for a crisis is when there isn't one. This simple, practical advice lies at the heart of the 25th Stoic principle, a proactive strategy that transforms how we face the inevitable uncertainties of life. The Stoics understood that surprise is a primary amplifier of panic. When an event catches us completely off guard, our emotional brain hijacks our rational mind, leading to reactive, often poor decisions. Their solution was not to live in a state of paranoid anxiety, but to engage in a deliberate and calming practice of premeditation, to walk through potential adversities in our minds and in our plans while the sun is still shining, so that when the storm finally arrives, we are not startled by its presence, but prepared for its challenges. This mental and practical rehearsal robs future difficulties of their power to shock and paralyze, allowing us to meet them with a composed and ready mind. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, is our most eloquent guide on this front. He didn't see this preparation as pessimistic, but as the ultimate form of optimism, the confidence that comes from knowing you are ready. He writes, "The person who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." He advises us to periodically subject ourselves to a form of mental time travel, to vividly imagine the potential losses and setbacks that fortune could send our way. He suggests we ask ourselves, what is the worst that can happen, and then follow that thread to its conclusion, not to frighten ourselves, but to familiarize ourselves. By doing this, we accomplish two crucial things. First, we realize that even in the worst-case scenario, we will still have our reason, our character, and our ability to choose our response, the core Stoic goods that can never be taken from us. Second, we normalize the possibility of adversity, stripping it of its terrifying novelty. Seneca promises that this practice makes actual suffering lighter, because we have already borne it in our minds and found ourselves capable of enduring it. This philosophy of preparedness extends beyond mere thought into tangible action. The Stoics were deeply practical. Their goal was always to live effectively in the world. This principle, therefore, also involves the sensible, preemptive work of building contingency plans. It's the financial savings that creates a buffer against a job loss, the regular health check-ups that catch problems early, the maintained relationships that become a support network in times of need. This isn't about hoarding or living in scarcity. It's about building resilience and options. A leader who embodies this is not someone who is fearful, but someone who is fundamentally free from the desperate scrambling that characterizes unpreparedness, and therefore free to act from a place of strategic choice rather than panicked reaction. Their composure is a direct result of their preparation. We can see this principle's immense value in leaders who are able to steer their organizations through completely unexpected collapses because they had built systems designed for volatility. While not a Stoic in name, the modern example of a tech CEO who rigorously tests their company's servers for massive traffic spikes or cyber attacks is practicing a form of this philosophy. They aren't expecting failure, they are respecting possibility. A more historical example can be found in the leadership of Winston Churchill during the interwar years. While many in Britain hoped for lasting peace, Churchill, often a voice in the wilderness, consistently prepared for the possibility of renewed conflict. He studied military technology, wrote about the growing threat of Nazi Germany, and advocated for rearmament. When the crisis of World War II did arrive, he was not caught by surprise. His years of mental and strategic preparation meant he could step into leadership not with panicked improvisation, but with a composed and ready mind, able to rally a nation with the famous words, "Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties." His strength came from having already braced himself long before the first shot was fired. This practice is perhaps the most actionable of all the Stoic principles for our daily lives. It invites us to shift from being passive recipients of fortune to active architects of our resilience. So let's make this personal. I want you to bring to mind one potential challenge that lives in the back of your mind, a quiet worry that occasionally surfaces. It might be the possibility of a health issue, a sudden economic downturn affecting your job, the breakdown of an important relationship, or even a natural disaster. Now, instead of pushing that thought away, engage with it stoically. Take out a piece of paper or open a note on your device. First, define the challenge clearly. Then, separate it into two columns. What is outside your control about this event, and what is within your control? Your preparation focuses entirely on the second column. What practical steps can you take now to mitigate the impact? This could be learning a new skill to make yourself more employable, starting an emergency fund, or having that difficult conversation to repair a relationship. Then mentally rehearse your response. How would your Stoic principles guide you? How would you maintain your character? What would acceptance look like? By writing this plan, you are not inviting disaster. You are building an invisible shield of composure around yourself, ensuring that no matter what the future holds, you will face it not with panic, but with prepared and purposeful calm. No one navigates collapse alone. How are you strengthening your circle right now? This question lies at the very heart of the 26th Stoic principle, a profound recognition that our composure and resilience are not purely individual achievements, but are deeply intertwined with the strength of our connections to others. The Stoics, often mistakenly portrayed as solitary and self-contained figures, actually placed immense value on community and the duty of service. They understood that a life lived only for oneself is not only barren but also fragile, lacking the external buttresses and internal sense of purpose that come from being part of something larger than our own private concerns. In times of calm, we may feel like independent actors, but when true crisis hits, it is the web of mutual support and shared purpose that often determines whether we bend or break. Composure, therefore, is not found in isolation, but in the confident knowledge that we are both supported by and responsible for our fellow human beings. Marcus Aurelius, steering the Roman Empire through plague and war, constantly returned to this idea as the moral compass for his leadership. He did not view his immense power as a personal possession for private enjoyment, but as a sacred trust granted for the benefit of others. In his meditations, he grounds this duty in a fundamental Stoic concept, the interconnectedness of all rational beings. He writes, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee." This simple, beautiful metaphor captures a radical idea that our individual well-being is inextricably linked to the health of the whole community. We cannot thrive in a collapsing hive. He reminds himself, men exist for the sake of one another, and therefore his role as emperor was to be a servant to his people, to teach them, to bear with them, and to work for their common good. This sense of purpose, of being a single bee working for the health of the entire hive, provided him with an unshakable foundation. The daily stresses of court intrigue and military setbacks could not unravel him because his identity was not tied to his own success or comfort, but to his steadfast service to the collective. His composure was a byproduct of this outward focus. This philosophy of communal resilience is vividly illustrated by leaders throughout history who understood that solidarity is the ultimate resource in hard times. During the darkest hours of the London Blitz in World War II, as bombs rained down and entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, the British government expected widespread panic and social breakdown. Instead, they witnessed the emergence of the legendary Blitz spirit. This wasn't a mythical quality of Stoic indifference. It was a practical, grassroots response rooted in mutual aid. People opened their homes to strangers left homeless, shared meager rations, and organized community shelters. This collective response, fostered by leaders like King George VI and Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who shared in the hardships, transformed a terrifying external event into a shared challenge. The composure of individuals was directly bolstered by the visible support of their community. Fear was mitigated because no one felt they were facing the terror alone. Their circle was strong, and that collective strength became their greatest defense against despair. The Stoic call to service, however, extends far beyond grand historical moments and into the fabric of our daily lives. Building a supportive circle isn't just about having people to lean on. It's about actively being a person others can lean on. This is where the principle becomes actively empowering. Service is not a burdensome duty that drains us. It is a practice that fortifies us. When we shift our focus from our own anxieties to the needs of others, we achieve a powerful cognitive shift. Our own problems, while not diminished, are often put into a healthier perspective. The act of helping a neighbor, volunteering your skills for a local cause, or simply listening deeply to a friend in distress reinforces our own sense of agency and value. It proves to us that even when we feel we have little to offer, we still have the capacity to contribute something meaningful. This creates a virtuous cycle. Service strengthens the community, which in turn supports the individual, who then has more resilience to offer further service. So I want to make this principle tangible for you right now. Look around at your own life and identify your hive, your personal and professional communities, your family, your neighborhood, even your online networks. How are those connections? Are they strong, resilient, and supportive, or have they become thin and neglected? The Stoic invitation is to become an active architect of your circle's strength, not a passive resident within it. This week, challenge yourself to identify one specific, actionable way you can contribute. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Perhaps it's checking in on an elderly relative with a phone call, offering your professional expertise to a young person trying to enter your field, or simply committing to being fully present and engaged in your conversations without the distraction of a phone. When you perform this action, pay attention not just to the benefit for the other person, but to the quiet sense of stability and purpose it creates within you. You are not just helping others, you are weaving a stronger safety net for your own future, building a community that will hold you steady when your own strength falters, and discovering that the deepest composure is found not in standing alone, but in standing together. What did your last mistake truly teach you about who you are and how you navigate the world? This question lies at the heart of the 27th Stoic principle, a transformative practice that reframes every single experience, but especially our failures and setbacks, not as punishments or final judgments, but as the most potent source of feedback and growth available to us. The Stoics rejected the notion of a purely fortunate or unfortunate life. Instead, they saw life as a continuous curriculum, and every event, whether welcomed or unwelcome, was a lesson designed to train us in virtue, resilience, and wisdom. This mindset shift is perhaps one of the most empowering aspects of their philosophy, because it means that no experience is ever wasted. A crushing defeat, a humiliating error, a painful rejection, these are not interruptions to a good life. They are essential chapters in its development if we have the courage to sit with them and extract their hidden value. Epictetus, who transformed his own life from the humiliation of slavery to a position of immense moral authority, was the master architect of this idea. He didn't just advise his students to endure hardship, he commanded them to actively mine it for its educational value. In his discourses, he presents a radical reframing of obstacles, declaring, "The true man is revealed in difficult times." So when trouble comes, think of yourself as a wrestler whom God, like a trainer, has paired with a tough young buck. This is a breathtaking metaphor. The Stoic God or universal nature is not a cruel tormentor throwing problems at you, but a wise coach who knows exactly what kind of opponent you need to face to develop your strength and skill. The setback, the failure, the difficult person, these are not your enemies. They are your sparring partners, sent to train you for a greater capacity for composure and virtue. Epictetus urges us to stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" This single shift in questioning transforms you from a passive victim of circumstance into an active, curious student of life. This philosophy of extracting lessons was the engine behind the evolution of some of history's most effective leaders. Consider the trajectory of Abraham Lincoln before his presidency. His life was a litany of what most would call failures. He lost his job, was defeated in multiple runs for state legislature and Congress, failed in business, and suffered a nervous breakdown. A person without a Stoic lens might see this as a string of evidence proving his inadequacy, but Lincoln, who read and admired the Stoics, seemed to treat each defeat as a data point. He learned from his political losses, refining his arguments and his public persona. He learned from business failure the importance of prudence and partnership. His immense capacity for empathy and his profound composure during the nation's darkest hour were not innate traits. They were muscles forged in the fire of his own personal setbacks. Each failure taught him something about human nature, resilience, and strategy, and he integrated those lessons until he became the leader uniquely suited to guide a fractured nation. His greatest strengths were carved out of his deepest losses. This practice is a deliberate and often uncomfortable discipline. It requires us to suspend our initial reactions of blame, shame, or defensiveness, and instead engage in a calm, forensic analysis of the event. After a project fails at work, the instinct might be to find a scapegoat or to ruminate on the embarrassment. The Stoic approach is to call a meeting not for blame, but for learning. What assumptions did we make that proved incorrect? Where were our blind spots? What did this reveal about our preparation or our processes? This isn't about fostering guilt, it's about gathering intelligence for the future. Similarly, in a personal conflict, instead of simply nursing a wound, we can ask ourselves what this revealed about our own expectations, our communication style, or our boundaries. Every stumble holds a lesson about the path itself, and the only way to waste a failure is to fail to learn from it. I want to invite you to try this right now. Bring to mind a recent stumble, large or small. It could be a professional misstep, a poorly handled conversation, a personal goal you didn't meet, or even a moment where you lost your temper. Now, set aside the emotional charge for a moment and put on the hat of a curious scientist studying this event. Ask yourself Epictetus's questions. What specific skill or virtue was this experience trying to teach me? Was it patience, better preparation, the courage to speak up sooner, humility, clearer communication? What is one single, concrete insight you can take from this that will make you slightly wiser, slightly stronger, or slightly more composed the next time you face a similar challenge? This act of extraction is the alchemy that turns the lead of failure into the gold of wisdom. It ensures that you are never truly defeated because every experience, no matter how difficult, leaves you better equipped for the next. Some things are meant to be held lightly or not at all. This gentle reminder is the gateway to the 28th Stoic principle, a profound and often misunderstood practice known as the art of letting go. The Stoics weren't advocating for a life of cold indifference or emotional numbness. Instead, they were offering a practical strategy for liberation, a way to untangle our inner peace from the unpredictable ebbs and flows of the external world. They observed that our deepest suffering rarely comes from the loss itself, but from our fierce, white-knuckled attachment to things that are, by their very nature, impermanent. True composure, they realized, is found not in our ability to cling tighter, but in our courage to release our grip, to accept the fundamental truth that everything we have, our relationships, our careers, our possessions, even our own health, is only on loan to us from fortune, and the terms of that loan are entirely outside our control. Seneca, in his profound letters to his friend Lucilius, explores this idea with breathtaking clarity. He writes, "You have to be able to let go of the things you love. Even if they remain with you, you must think of them as possibly leaving." This isn't a prescription for pessimism, it's a recipe for psychological freedom. He advises us to periodically practice a form of mental detachment, to consciously imagine life without the people and things we cherish most. The purpose of this exercise is not to make us sad, but to shatter our illusion of permanence and awaken a deep, active appreciation for what we have right now. By mentally rehearsing loss, we inoculate ourselves against the paralyzing shock of it when it actually occurs. Seneca promises that this practice reveals a stunning truth, that we are often more frightened by the idea of losing something than we would be by the actual loss itself. The freedom he describes is the freedom from that fear, the calm assurance that even if everything external was stripped away, our core self, our character, our reason, our virtue, would remain intact and unassailable. We can see this principle embodied with incredible grace in leaders who have faced catastrophic personal and professional setbacks without losing their effectiveness or their inner equilibrium. Consider the example of a business leader who has poured their heart and soul into building a company, only to see it fail due to a market shift entirely beyond their control. A leader ruled by attachment would be crushed by this loss, their identity so fused with their success that its collapse feels like a personal death. They might retreat into bitterness or shame, unable to move forward. A leader who has practiced the Stoic art of letting go, however, would grieve the loss honestly, but would then be able to separate their self-worth from the outcome of the venture. Their focus would swiftly turn from the external event they cannot change, the failure of the company, to the internal qualities they still command, their resilience, their hard-won experience, their capacity to innovate, and their ability to begin again. This detachment from the specific outcome allows them to remain effective, to learn from the failure, and to channel their energy into new endeavors without being anchored to the past. This art is not about becoming passive or ceasing to care. It is about changing the nature of our care. We can care deeply about our work without attaching our entire sense of self to a promotion. We can love people profoundly without believing we own them or that they are obligated to fulfill our every expectation. We can pursue goals with intense passion while holding the results lightly, understanding that our worth is not contingent on a specific victory. This is the subtle but crucial shift from being attached to the object to being committed to the virtue behind our engagement. We are attached to being a diligent worker, not to the job title. We are attached to being a loving partner, not to controlling the other person's behavior. This reframe transfers the source of our satisfaction from the unreliable external world to the sovereign internal one, creating a composure that can withstand any storm of change. Now bring this principle into the quiet space of your own life. I want you to identify one specific attachment that you sense might be quietly draining your calm or making you vulnerable to future distress. It doesn't have to be a major thing. Perhaps it's an attachment to a particular outcome for a project at work, a need for a certain group of people to like and approve of you, or even an emotional dependence on a daily routine that, when disrupted, ruins your entire mood. Choose one. Now, for just a moment, practice Seneca's exercise. Imagine that this thing you're holding onto so tightly is gone. Sit with the feeling, not to panic, but to acquaint yourself with it. Then ask yourself the core Stoic question. In this scenario, what would still be within my control? Your ability to choose your response, your character, your next step, these would remain. This small act of mental release isn't about inviting loss. It's about building an inner spaciousness around your attachments, a buffer zone of calm acceptance that allows you to engage fully with life without being broken by its inevitable changes. What daily ritual grounds you before the chaos begins? This isn't just a question about productivity or wellness. It's the gateway to the 29th and perhaps most practical Stoic principle, the art of integrating philosophy into the very fabric of your daily life through intentional rituals. The Stoics understood a profound truth about human nature. Knowledge alone is not power. Knowledge applied consistently through action is. A brilliant insight forgotten by noon is useless in a crisis. Their genius was in recognizing that virtue and composure are not innate traits we either have or lack, but are muscles that must be exercised daily through small, repeatable practices. These rituals are the drills that transform abstract philosophy into automatic response, ensuring that when the storm of a real collapse hits, your calm isn't something you have to think about. It's simply who you are and how you operate. Marcus Aurelius, despite the unimaginable weight of leading an empire, was meticulous about his own morning ritual, and he left us a blueprint in his personal journal. He didn't wake up and immediately check scrolls from the frontier or messages from senators. He began with a period of quiet preparation, a mental tuning of his instrument before the symphony of the day began. In Meditations, he writes, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." This was his first intentional thought, a deliberate cultivation of gratitude to frame the coming hours. He would then mentally rehearse the challenges he was likely to face, not to worry about them, but to prepare his character for them. He advised himself, begin each day by telling yourself, "Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness." This sounds negative, but it's actually a powerful form of psychological inoculation. By anticipating the friction and folly of the world, he prevented himself from being surprised or offended by it. His morning ritual was a proactive grounding in reality, setting his intentions to respond to whatever happened with patience, justice, and wisdom. This ancient practice of ritualizing philosophy is far from a historical relic. It's been adopted by some of the most effective modern leaders as a non-negotiable part of their operating system. Many high-performing executives, elite athletes, and military officers consciously employ Stoic exercises to maintain their edge and clarity. They might start the day with a version of the view from above, spending 5 minutes in quiet contemplation to ensure their daily tasks are connected to a larger, meaningful mission. They might use the Premeditatio Malorum to walk through potential failures in an upcoming negotiation, not to fear them, but to have prepared responses, thereby reducing anxiety and increasing adaptability. Others use an evening reflection, not unlike Seneca's prescribed self-audit, to review their actions, acknowledge where they fell short of their values, and plan for a better tomorrow. For these individuals, these aren't abstract philosophical concepts. They are practical tools as essential as their morning coffee that build the mental resilience required to make tough decisions under extreme pressure without being eroded by stress. The true power of a ritual lies in its ability to bypass the conscious, deliberative mind and embed principles directly into the subconscious, where they become instinct. Think of it like learning to drive a car. Initially, every action, checking mirrors, signaling, braking, requires conscious thought and effort. But after thousands of repetitions, these actions become automatic. You don't think about them, you just do them. Stoic rituals aim for the same outcome with your character. The daily practice of pausing before reacting, of looking for the good in a difficult situation, of questioning your first impulsive judgment. These are the reps. Over time, they rewire your neural pathways. Where there was once a hair-trigger reaction of anger, there is now a habitual pause. Where there was anxiety about an uncertain future, there is now a default setting of focusing on the present task. Your rituals forge a composure that is not a fragile mask you put on, but your fundamental nature. So the invitation is to become the architect of your own daily practice. This doesn't require a dramatic overhaul of your life. In fact, it demands the opposite, one small, simple, but incredibly consistent ritual. I want you to design one for yourself to try tomorrow morning. It doesn't need to be long or complex. Perhaps it's spending 60 seconds as you wake up to bring to mind one thing you're grateful for. Maybe it's writing down a single virtue you want to embody today, like courage or patience, on a small card you keep in your pocket. It could be taking 2 minutes to mentally rehearse a potential challenge in your day and how you would like to respond to it with reason rather than emotion. The key is consistency, not duration. Choose one practice that resonates with you, attach it to an existing habit like brushing your teeth or drinking your first glass of water, and commit to it for 1 week. Observe the subtle shift it creates in your awareness and your reactions. This is how you stop just reading about Stoicism and start living it, building your invisible rulebook one daily, grounded page at a time. And so we arrive at the heart of the matter, the quiet conclusion after the storm of principles and practices. We've journeyed through the invisible rulebook, exploring its core pillars, the foundational wisdom of focusing only on what we can control, the resilient strength built by cultivating an inner citadel, the transformative power of embracing our fate with purpose, and the profound clarity that comes from being fully present in each moment. These are not separate ideas but interlocking parts of a single, coherent system for navigating chaos, a philosophy forged not in comfort but in the fires of human struggle. From the personal journals of a plague-stricken emperor to the prison letters of a modern revolutionary, these principles have been the quiet, unwavering compass for those who have steered societies and souls through the deepest collapses, proving that the most powerful leadership tool is not a title or a weapon, but a composed and virtuous mind. To close, let's turn to a powerful and perhaps less familiar thought from Seneca, who reminds us of the source of true invincibility. He writes, "A sword is never a killer, it is a tool in the killer's hand." The real power, the real source of composure, was never in the external event, the collapsing economy, the critical comment, the failed plan. The power has always resided within you, in your capacity to choose your judgment and your action. The events of the world are merely the sword, your mind is the hand that wields it. Will you let it be wielded by panic, by fear, by the unpredictable winds of external opinion? Or will you take firm hold of it, guided by the principles of this invisible rulebook, and choose to respond with reason, courage, and justice? As this video ends, your practice begins. I encourage you to pause and reflect. Which one of these 29 principles resonated with you most deeply today? Perhaps it's the idea of premeditating challenges to disarm anxiety, or the practice of finding gratitude amidst loss, or the simple discipline of listening more than you speak. Choose just one. Don't try to master them all at once. Take that single idea and make it your project for this week. Write it down, put it somewhere you'll see it, and practice it just a little each day. This is how you build your own rulebook of composure, brick by brick, choice by choice. If you found value in exploring these Stoic insights for modern life, consider subscribing to the channel for more guides on building resilience and wisdom. I would love to hear which principle you're taking with you. Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and support each other in building lives of greater purpose, calm, and impact. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter what collapses around you, the power to build your response